Hello, Avatar fans, and welcome to the next episode of the Avatar Online podcast. This is going to be episode 304 of our regular shows, and we're recording this one on the 9th of May, 2026. This is the official podcast for the fan site AvatarTheLastAirbenderOnline.com, and I'm going to be your main host, Morgan Airspeed Prime. Joining me on the podcast is Greg2B from the site.
What's up, everyone?
Excellent. So on today's podcast, it's going to be a pretty interesting one. We're going to do a kind of brief news segment discussing the very obvious piece of news that happened immediately after the last podcast. And then we actually have 4 reviews to go over. 2 new comics that have come out in the last couple of days. And then we will get back to our Avatar and Korra rewatches. So we're going to be reviewing the Comics Giveaway Day book for this year, issue 1 of the Kyoshi Warrior comic miniseries. From Korra, K310, Long Live the Queen, and from Avatar 304, Sokka's Master. But like I said, we'll start with some news. There actually has been quite a bit of news if you look into everything, but we're going to keep it focused on the big thing that happened. It was, it basically started, I think, the day after the last podcast, so we literally just missed this. I think we joked about this off recording. What's going to leak next? Turns out it was going to be 2 clips. Someone claimed on Twitter that they were emailed accidentally the whole movie. They leaked 2 clips of it, and that was kind of fine. Except the immediate next day, the entire movie leaked out online, and that's kind of what we've been dealing with ever since. So, kind of pretty much disaster kind of scenario for the movie here. Like, this is absolutely top of the list of things you didn't want to see happen, but it did. Interestingly, we're coming to this like nearly a month on from when it happened, and it has calmed down. Like, it felt like the end of the world at the time, and it definitely feels like things maybe aren't as kind of absolutely awful as they were before. They can definitely still salvage something from this, but it's still not an ideal position to be in. But just what are your thoughts just in general? We'll go through this in as much detail as we can, but in general on just the idea of the whole thing leaked.
Yeah, no, I mean, like you said, this is pretty much worst case scenario. That's always like the hardest thing to like try to recover from, when literally the whole project that, has been working on since they've announced that Avatar has been going to sort of like come back into the spotlight of things, and it just, unceremoniously just sort of gets out there in the open with, anyone who wants to really try to find it, being able to have access to it, and then just seeing all of the reactions to it from, both the good and the bad side, depending on your perspective. Definitely was something to see it all sort of play out in sort of like real time, and all the speculation and all the other sort of facets that sort of like deal with something of that sort of magnitude dropping. And I don't know, it makes me wonder how would this have felt if it was still like a theoretical sort of like release as well. So there's that to keep in mind as well. There's so many different sort of, I guess you could say, angles you could come at this from.
Yeah, I don't even know kind of where to start here. I suppose just with the leaker, because like since it's all happened, like the leaker's apparently been caught from Singapore. This, I think it's just speculation based on kind of Singapore law that like it's going to be probably some sort of a fine, maybe some jail time, depending on how that all ends up kind of happening. But yeah, the guy on Twitter who leaked it initially, it seems like there is actually multiple leakers, has been caught. Interestingly, though, the leaker as like the kind of personality of the leaker on Twitter was kind of echoing like a lot of what the fandom felt about Paramount in all of this, and that like it was kind of weird to see the whole movie get leaked from someone kind of going like, if Paramount aren't going to do it, I guess I will. And that being the thing in the middle of like all of this happening, and that, yeah, that's the situation we're in. This movie has had every single possible like accidental official information, leak that not many people know about, leak that everyone knows about now, full leak, and Paramount still haven't actually said anything publicly about the movie the whole time through, basically. Now, a lot of people have been asking like, oh, since it's out, Paramount just put it up online, but I don't think they were ever going to do that. I think their response of basically to just start copyright kind of striking stuff to get it taken down was correct, and to not do anything like an overreaction and just put it up on Paramount Plus when you've not actually done any proper promotion, and obviously not like abandoning all the other kind of tie-in stuff. That's, I think, what a lot of people suggesting this were completely forgetting about, is that there is going to be all those books and stuff like that, even more of them getting announced like this week, art book and stuff like that. You can't just leave all that to kind of die 6 months into the future just to maybe get some views on Paramount Plus. I think they are doing the right thing, which is waiting, because oddly, the fact that the movie is complete and it's so far out has sort of like saved the situation here, because
slightly, yeah,
like it's already been a month, and things I think have calmed down a little bit, and it's going to be like 5 more months still until the movie comes out, and they haven't even set a proper release date yet. That helps them because they still have like every single thing in marketing to kind of generate some interest, because not everyone saw this league, even though it seems like everyone has. Not everyone has. But yeah, what are your thoughts on just I suppose the situation now a few weeks on? Is this as crazy as it felt that first week?
Yeah, I think I definitely do feel that it has died down a bit. I think everyone who really wanted to get access to it has already by this point, and a lot of them have like spoken their piece. And on social media you still will see people come out and say a couple things here or there about what's in the movie that most people haven't seen unless they've really looked towards it. So I think in their idea of just sort of basically like just trying to like hold fast towards things has seemed to like sort of worked out for them. And I think I saw somewhere else someone was suggesting that like this might even have the sort of like opposite effect where they'll hold it back even a little bit longer, just because to sort of like wait out and let the buzz sort of die. Because I think while it has been very, very sort of publicly put out there that this was done, and that, people who are sort of paying attention to this sort of know about this, I think, I don't know, sometimes it's hard to see in sort of like the echo chamber of sort of the fandom how widespread this sort of news actually really goes. Like, is this making like, the 5 o'clock news or whatever on normal broadcast TV? Like, I don't think it's really gone that sort of far in terms of the viralness of it. I mean, it's all over TikTok and Threads and X and all that sort of stuff. So if you're looking for it, you definitely can see it. And I think at least on my feeds, it was trending for a bit. Now I don't know how, trending is like regional and the algorithms and everything like that. So just because you see it on your trending doesn't mean that it's going to, someone in Japan is going to see it on their trending feed. So, it's kind of hard to gauge it sometimes with that. But I know from anecdotally people who I know who are into the fandom who don't necessarily pay attention to it on social media that hard, they didn't really know about it. Like, I was the one to tell them about it. So I don't know, I wonder the wide range of this sort of implications. I think it still will have some sort of effect overall internally on sort of the company and stuff like that and what they do, but I think in terms of what we see for the immediate reaction, like, I don't think this is going to get them, at least in the short term, to get them to put it back into the theaters or anything like that. Like, I think there might still be hope for, if it does really well, for them to put it in sort of like a limited release. Like, that would be like my ideal thing of seeing it in sort of like in the theaters, if they were to go that sort of route. But who knows how that will go. I mean, we've seen that happen with other projects, like stuff on like Netflix and that. So I think if it does really well despite everything that's sort of happened to it, maybe it'll still be able to bounce back a little bit. But yes, it's a big machine with these sort of productions, like you're saying. Like, there's so many other sort of tie-in media, publishing sort of projects, merchandising, that is still going forward. Like, it doesn't seem like they killed any of that sort of stuff. So until they sort of bring everything down, it still seems like they're still going forward with what they have, at least currently in the take. We'll see how long that goes towards the future with other movie projects and stuff like that. So there's still a lot that could potentially happen, but a lot of it, is still up in the air, and a lot of it we probably still wouldn't know about it regardless.
Yeah, in terms of like Paramount stuff, bits and pieces have happened. They had an article up on, I think it's the Paramount Plus website, that was everything you need to know about the movie. The article had originally gone up in December when the switch to streaming happened, but they only had like the Avatar Studios logo on it. It had a bunch of like rapid fire updates where they put the old logo on, then they put the new logo on, and then they finally updated the text to include the finalized title. So Avatar Aang: The Last Airbender is now kind of, I suppose, officially confirmed. Not that it wasn't really before, but they still haven't publicly posted that. Like the official Instagram, any of the Avatar accounts haven't even updated with that, which to me gives the impression probably that, I'm guessing if not for the leak, there probably was some plan for like an initial bit of news at some point, probably in April or kind of coming up soon, because now we are going to enter Netflix Avatar kind of season 2 territory, where that trailer will be probably in like 2 weeks. And once that hits, I don't think they're going to drop anything related to the movie during the immediate build up to season 2 and then the few weeks after season 2 drops. So it does feel like we are now just going to have like, I guess we're fully just waiting for San Diego Comic-Con, like the build up to and San Diego Comic-Con itself, for them to actually say stuff. But that's going to be such a weird panel if they go in saying nothing. Everyone knows the movie, basically. Everyone knows it leaked and has probably seen more than anyone ever wanted to, even if you've been avoiding spoilers. And what can they really do there to kind of make that super exciting, other than to like also bring in Seven Haven stuff, which hasn't leaked in the same way. And that's the weirdness of this, is that the probably the main effect that it has is it just makes basically all the marketing surrounding the movie kind of like not as exciting, because most people have seen a lot, spoiled on certain things, or have had to kind of spoiler proof themselves by watching it now, because it's impossible to avoid the fandom if you're in the fandom. So what are your thoughts on that? Just like, I suppose, when are Paramount going to actually kind of say stuff? And then, what do you think about San Diego Comic-Con with this in mind?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. There's just so much you could think about with going to it from that perspective there. I mean, I don't know. For me, I always sort of suspected it kind of would wait until San Diego Comic-Con to hear anything. So the fact that we're not getting anything until then, no, in my mind, that sort of like lines up with things, especially with Netflix Avatar and sort of having to sort of wait for the buzz and the showing and sort of the die down of that to sort of happen. Like, it almost seems like them sort of extending things out, which was seemingly always their plan, sort of was, aligned with what they were going to do. Sort of the issue, of course, is the fact with the leak and everything with that, and how they sort of, pivot from having that sort of information out there. And I don't know, it's a hard one to deal with, because, San Diego Comic-Con are obviously where you would have the highest density of people who are in the fandom, right? So if any people were to see the movie, those would most likely be the people to see it. Not all of them. I mean, I think, it might be sort of misconstrued to thinking that everyone who goes to the conventions is sort of like a hardcore fan, such as we are, who, we're here every month talking about it, and, people, making videos and stuff about that, and, creating content for it. I think you would be, some people might be surprised that a lot of people that are at the convention are more sort of like split, I find, at least, in terms of NYCC, anecdotally, from what I've found, is that, not everyone in there is sort of as up to date with all the information as we are. I don't know, it feels like it's like split, like 50-50. Like, some people will be like super into it that I've talked to, and then other ones, that'll be where they find out the information. Granted, there'll be people who will be talking about it, so I'm sure by the end of that panel or whatever, everyone there will know that, even if it's just word of mouth, that the film actually leaked there. So I don't know. I mean, they haven't really been, as open at the conventions as we might have liked in the past, with like Q&As and stuff like that. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how, they sort of deal with that. I'm sure they'll say something about it. It may not be anything sort of directly because, there's a whole bunch of rules and stuff on talking about stuff like that. So, they'll have to sort of word their way around it in some regard while sort of acknowledging at the same time. So I don't know. That'll be a hard thing for them to do as well during that. But yeah, I don't know. I think definitely showing Seven Havens, like you said, will definitely be something that will make it more interesting to see. I think giving, more context, more sort of understanding towards, what the film's actually going to be. If they do like a legit teaser trailer, towards what's actually going to sort of be in the movie, I think that would, generate a lot of hype for it to actually get to see it in sort of an official way and capacity rather than just sort of, the version that's out there right now. So I don't know. I think they can still come from the convention more a success, especially getting it out there to the various media markets, even if they do, all of them have like an asterisk on them that yes, the movie has sort of leaked as well.
Yeah, it does feel like at this point, like the only thing they can really do to just really generate excitement would be some sort of an announcement about some sort of a theatrical run. Like that would be like the real thing to get people excited, because like the cast and crew have all been basically advocating for this. Like you've seen that when they had their cast and crew screening, the director was saying it, the actors were saying it, the couple of voice actors that have kind of spoken out about the leaks have all been basically kind of alluding to that. And Janet Varney, her video was interesting because she had to kind of reveal that, like, oh, I got to see it theatrical. Oh, actually, I just realized how that comes across. I maybe shouldn't be as critical of this as I kind of maybe wanted to be. Some sort of announcement about that would be kind of cool, listening to the fans. But the question really is, like, logistically, can they do it, and all that sort of stuff? It's a bit of an odd one. Obviously, Paramount must be looking at this very closely. They must be seeing the excitement that this has generated, because it did spike the fandom for like a good few days. Like the excitement was kind of incredible during that leak day, even factoring in all the kind of like, oh, what are we doing here? But the numbers, even the numbers on just the 2 clips before the whole movie leaked, like that was a real kind of like, oh, like there is real proper excitement in this, and they know they have something popular, even though their own actions maybe don't give the best impression about that sort of stuff. But yeah, we've got a few months to calm things down. We'll build up to it again. We'll see what they do at San Diego Comic-Con. And then, yeah, all the kind of publishing stuff surrounding the release and stuff like, say, the soundtrack, which I assume they'll have kind of ready to go. That sort of stuff will be exciting, just to see, like, all the channels just posting all the promo art. You'll be able to buy books that have that promo art. If you want stickers, there's an activity book that has stickers. The art book and deluxe art book were just announced like earlier this week. Abrams is doing them this time out. And then the big one actually is that Abrams adult novelization of the movie that will have extended scenes. I think when more people have seen the movie, that novel is actually going to probably be a really big one here if it has extended scenes and kind of explains things more. And all that's all stuff that we have to wait for the actual release for. And then finally getting Comic-Con, finally getting them to talk about Avatar Studios. They could save a lot of this by just talking kind of openly, passionately about the future of the franchise beyond just this movie, and just kind of clarifying kind of what the plan is. Like, okay, movie Seven Havens, but then what's going on with these other series that we've kind of heard about? What about the other movies that we haven't heard anything about? Those are the big questions. Like, I think Comic-Con is like kind of has to be pretty big this year. In addition to all the other stuff like publishing, like, is anything changing now that animation has started? Like, is Seven Havens going to get comics? Is Korra going to get more comics because Seven Havens is the one afterwards? Is the Aang era open again to do comics in the adult era? A lot of questions about like how big they go with all that sort of stuff. But that's just the weirdness of this whole leak situation. my thoughts on, I suppose, like what I'm seeing at the moment is that I would say the first week was pretty bad about people just like posting like anything and everything from the movie, like spoilers. It doesn't matter about spoilers, just everything's out there. I've not really seen anything I would say like truly spoilery over like the last like week or two. It mostly does seem to be people just posting like, oh, here's a random image of Katara from the movie because this account really likes Katara, and that usual kind of like fan account thing where it's people posting their favorite characters, and mostly just it's that character with their look from the movie rather than the crazy first few weeks. But you still see bits and pieces, so it's still not ideal. But again, there's still the idea that like again, most content creators haven't really covered the movie, so like all that stuff has to happen. All the actual outlets haven't reviewed the movie. There's still that part of it of like proper real discussion happening and not just the kind of Twitter hot takes. But final thoughts, I suppose, on the leak here to kind of round off the news.
Yeah, no, I think like you're saying, it's calmed down enough that I think people are sort of evening out on sort of the news here, and since it hasn't really been officially out there, it's not really there sort of like in force as it will be, I'm sure, when it actually comes out on streaming and stuff like that. I don't know, I feel like, it was very sort of like sort of hot, sort of visceral sort of like reaction towards it being out there, and people, somewhat, justifiably being sort of upset with Paramount and how they're doing everything with Nickelodeon with the show and stuff like that. So I feel like a lot of like the initial sort of deluge of spoilers and stuff was, a lot of it was sort of like in response to that, and now that it's sort of died down, there's definitely not as much of it. I personally haven't seen anything like super spoilery of it or anything like that in like, maybe a week or two or something like that. So I don't know, we'll definitely have to see how it goes from here.
Yeah, like there was a little bit of kind of the sky is falling happening, I think, the first kind of couple of weeks where like there was people being like, just put the movie out right now, Avatar Studios is over, get what you can. Like, and it's just like they're not going to overreact when they still have Seven Havens, and I think they're clearly more focused on series than movies based on what things look like at the moment. Probably wasn't helped that the Avatar Studios official website went down for like a full week. It only, I think, went back up yesterday or the day before. Full week just completely gone, 404 error. It's come back up basically identical as it was before, just I think with the copyright information updated to 2026. Not sure what to make of that. Was it some sort of a security update? Was it just them literally doing the 2026 updates, preparing for some sort of a thing? Because, again, that's probably the main frustration thing there is we've had this official Avatar Studios website for a while now. It doesn't mention the Aang movie anywhere on the whole website. They link to like their YouTube social media platforms where you will eventually find out about the Aang movie, but it's like this close to release, it's kind of crazy that it still just says, oh, the studio's making movies and series, even though we technically have news about both of those things kind of up front. But yeah, just do you have any quick thoughts on just what happened with the official website?
Yeah, no, I thought that was funny to just see that sort of happen. And I definitely saw a lot of people sort of being very sort of upset. But I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think, on one hand, I can see the perspective where, if this was like a mainstay website, like they would have had that up in like, 2 seconds, right? Like they would have had priority focus on getting it back up there. But clearly, in some regard, it's not a super, priority focus as of a website yet. And, I guess you can be debatable on, how important websites are these days in terms of fandom and how, communication gets out there. I think there still is a place for it, but, I'm older, so I like websites and stuff like that. So I don't know, but it definitely, you can see how it can be a reflection of the fandom in its current time. I don't think it's doom and gloom or anything like that. Not when there's still media and projects and stuff coming out there. And you can still see, you can look up information about the website. You can see that it's still registered to, Nickelodeon, Viacom, Paramount and all that sort of stuff. So it's not like they let the domain go or anything like that, because that would be, a bigger issue if they just like lost it completely or something like that. So it definitely doesn't, bode 100% well, but it's still there. They're still going to use it. I'm sure they'll update it eventually once they're ready to do it. I feel like it's, they're really sort of trying to build up for everything, but it's just, they're getting sort of waylaid by different things.
Yeah, like that's my thoughts on it as well, is that like it didn't really matter because the websites never really mattered outside of like when it first went up, because like the timeline, I think they updated it once to correct some errors, but it still has other errors. Like it's just that timeline project feels relatively like abandoned. They haven't updated that at all. And then yeah, the news stuff, they've roughly kept it up to date, but like they're not great about like, oh, new books have been announced, here's the pre-order for the Jet comic, the Kaya comic, Masters of the Elements. Like that's all behind, let alone any of the like movie stuff, of course, because there's no mention of the movie. It needs an update to have like a news section at the very least, I think. That's what I think it's really, really missing, because like even back when Korra was airing, we had Korra Nation to have like a official kind of place for news. Not having that is a bit like odd, especially because like we're not super kind of close to Nickelodeon anymore. So like the Avatar page on Nickelodeon, I don't even know what it is or if there is one anymore. So it's a weird kind of situation on that front. But yeah, that has been the news, and we'll go into the first of our comic reviews here. So we're going to start off. This is the Comics Giveaway Day 2026 / Free Comic Book Day 2026. But because Dark Horse is under Penguin Random House, we're Comics Giveaway Day this time out. We have our first Avatar Legends comic here, tied in with a Minecraft story as well, but we're only going to talk about the Avatar one. Yeah, this is interesting here. We have this story. It's called Earth and Water, script by David M. Boer, pencils and inks by Bailey Rosenlund, colors by Chris Peter, lettering by Comic Crafts, Jimmy Betancourt and Tyler Smith, and the cover art is by Mindy W, Mind IIW. I don't know the pronunciation of the cover artist's name, but this is the Avatar Legends story here. It's about Roku and his earthbending master Sud, and it's yet to be officially confirmed, but I'd be shocked if this wasn't the case. This is highly likely to be the Roku story in the upcoming Masters of the Elements. Really surprised if that's not going to be the case. I think that's the point of this, is that they actually have it planned out for Comic Giveaway Day book this year to have an issue out the week afterwards, which we're going to talk about, and the book itself is a preview for a book coming out in a couple of months. So they've actually planned it out properly this year, which is pretty nice overall. But we'll just start with some general thoughts and then we'll go through it sort of page by page. Overall, Greg, what were your thoughts on Earth and Water?
Overall, I thought it was fine. I think it's, it's a nice, very sort of short story to just sort of give you a glimpse into Roku's sort of training with his earthbending master. And I think, it's nice to see just sort of it in sort of like, a situation that's important and dire, but it's not sort of, world ending or anything like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's a pretty solid story. It's nothing crazy. I think we have had better like 10-page comics before. That's how many pages this one is. I think it definitely makes you kind of go like, okay, story selection is going to be such a big thing for Masters of the Elements, in that like if they upset Kyoshi fans and don't do a good Kyoshi story, like you can tell that people are going to be a little bit disappointed by this. For Roku, especially this kind of actually being the kind of follow-up to Awakening of Roku, works out pretty nicely, because we saw in the first book his air training, second book kind of focused on water a little bit, now we go on to Earth. It's cool to have this stuff for Roku. I do think they could have maybe done a little bit more character work with Sud to present him a little bit clearer. There's definitely a little bit of a sense that they play it quite safe in the writing department, because it's very focused on, oh, what's their dynamic from Avatar and the Fire Lord? Oh, they're competitive with each other. We'll reference that a bunch of times. And there's maybe not as much beyond that, but there's some nice, like, Sud being a teacher moments here that are actually, like, I think pretty solid. So we'll get through this here. I suppose, just in case we don't get around to it, this is I think that's our first time on Avatar having Bailey Rosenlund on art. What were your thoughts on the art throughout this one?
Oh, no, I thought the art was fine. I think for, showing him at this point in time in his sort of, I guess, career, his training, no, it worked pretty well. I think this, it's not sort of too, show look. It has its own sort of style and technique to it that I think works well for Roku in this point in time.
Yeah, I like it as well. I'd be very happy to see more from Bailey Rosenlund, especially because I'm pretty sure one of the artists is going to have to double up for Masters of the Elements, so we're kind of expecting maybe that last one that we don't know much about to maybe be this artist, but we're not really sure. But yeah, there's some nice stuff here. Roku, Sud, the village that we see here, but also the kind of background environment with all the kind of mudslide stuff is pretty nicely done. But we'll go through it here page by page. Like I said, it's only 10 pages, so we're going to get through this relatively quickly. So we start off, and this is Sud's hometown. Over the course of the context of this, we find out. The task is simple, Roku. You'll use earthbending to deconstruct the cube of stones from one platform and reconstruct it on the other platform. I will do the same. So immediately we get into the idea, Roku wants to make this a race. We see that Sud is kind of like, you shouldn't probably make everything a race, but okay, we'll do it that way. And they jump into action, and we see them, they disassemble this block of stone. They're moving it above their heads onto the other platform. And Sud gives his narration about the key to earthbending is strength and precision. It's about determination and patience. You must also embrace earthbending's neutral jing, and you have to listen and react. While this is happening, Sud basically completes his block, but Roku has dropped some small stones out of his as he's levitating it, and he ends up with just a pile of various shaped rocks, whereas Sud has a full cube. So the idea here is that Roku has good power with earthbending, but he's struggling a little bit with the precision here. So what are your thoughts on these opening 2 pages?
I think this was nice. I think it's, we get to understand sort of their dynamic pretty clearly here, which, safe or not, it goes in line with what we know of the characters so far. And I think, it feels like we've gotten to the point where we see that Roku, he just seems, even though I guess initially I thought, he might not be, that sort of competitive and things, like he was a little bit sort of unsure with himself, but it seems like with the right people or the people that he considers, friends and stuff like that, he can be quite competitive with them in terms of what he's actually doing going forward. So I don't know, I kind of like that little bit here, and the panels flow very well, and I like the whole way of them sort of showing the earthbending without actually seeing what's happening, and then you get the final reveal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's cool that you see that like Sud has that kind of like old master kind of element to him, where he's not just all about strength. Like he emphasizes the precision of earthbending just as much. You have to be in control of it. That's really cool to see. And then they mention neutral jing, of course. But then there's immediately a rumble, some sort of an earthquake style thing is happening. Someone comes in and calls out to them, come quickly. A rock slide is rushing towards the village. They see it coming down the mountain, which interestingly is the mountain we see them kind of race up in Avatar the Fire Lord. So it's the same location here, of course. This is basically a prequel to that sequence. So the two of them rush out, and this is where Roku notes that this one will actually require more strength than precision. So they take their kind of rooted stance, and they make this giant wall together. And they basically immediately shield the village from any like damage from the actual rock slide. But of course, it's caused damage up and down the mountain. And as we find out on the next page, the rock slide has contaminated the village's water supply. So they're going to have to head up there to sort this out, because they established that this village has only this one source of fresh water. And it took a lot of effort to make that happen by Sud's ancestors. So there's no just finding another source of water. It has to be that one. So they do actually need to go up there to fix this, or everyone who lives here might have to abandon their home. So what are your thoughts on these next 2 pages?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, it's fairly cool to get to see sort of, I don't know, this instance sort of, this is the problem that we're going to have to deal with. And it sort of, counteracts what they were exactly just practicing. Although we do find out later on it does require a little bit more precision. But, Roku's just like, oh, I can help with this. So it's nice to see that he has, at this point, however long they've been training, which, we don't know exactly, he does have a pretty good understanding because, from reading the books, of course, we know he was quite sort of struggling with it before, so it's nice to get to see that at this point in time, which it looks like he's quite a bit older from what we've seen him in sort of the books. He at least can do a good amount of work with it, even if he doesn't have all the sort of like finesse that would really be required as Earthbender.
So yeah, this is pretty cool. Probably one of the only criticisms I'd have of the book is just like, I wish they would have just named Sud's hometown here. It's one of those things that they do this sometimes where like they will give us a new name, but then kind of feels weird that they don't here because they're trying to get across that the uniqueness of this comic is Sud and his hometown, but they won't like say it's here, say it's near this major location or anything like that. No, that's just a slight frustration. But anyway, they go to head up the mountain. Of course, it's covered in mud, so Roku tries to go up quite quickly, but he slips, and this is where he is saved by Sud. There's a little bit of, I guess, of a also Avatar the Far Lord reference, but with Roku and Sozin here, where like Sud does what Roku will later do to save Sozin, just a little earthbending shift to kind of pull out a little ledge to save him. And yeah, they just joke up and down the mountain. Neutral, what's your neutral Jing telling you? It's what my feet are telling you. So yeah, they get up there and they find the kind of source of the kind of spring water, covered in mud. How do we actually kind of resolve this? I suppose Sud had maybe hoped that there was just a blockage, not at the source. So it's pretty bad, and he's beginning to kind of lose hope here. That can we do this with just earth bending? Roku kind of highlights, but look, I have water bending. I'll force it out that way. And Sud is like, no. If you do this with too much power, you might cause something even worse than a rock slide, and the village might be in even more danger. Like, this has to be precision from all fronts, but we're beginning to see Sud kind of lose a little bit of hope here that they might not be able to resolve this. They might have to abandon his home, is sort of the takeaway here. But what are your thoughts on these next pages?
Yeah, I guess this is another point where we see, Roku trying to sort of jump to conclusions and figure out a solution, which I do like to see that he's, even if it's misplaced, he's confident in that, there can be something to do, even though he's still of the mindset of like just go ahead with it, which I guess that's sort of, a little bit sort of the firebender mentality maybe of just sort of using as much power as you can to sort of achieve the solution here, but we're slowly getting it across to him that isn't the way to go here. But yeah, I think this was a nice way to set up this.
So Sud seems a little bit forlorn about this. Roku is the one to kind of inspire his master here. For as long as I've known you, Master Sud, you've never given up on anything. When I came here to train as the Avatar, you were the one who told me that the people of the Earth Kingdom believe that no task is impossible. And Sud completes his own quote. It simply hasn't been done yet. So he has an idea. He first introduces the concept of mud bending, which is, of course, that an earthbender can bend mud because it has earth in it. And then basically you can sort of almost like squeeze the earth together, and that gets rid of the water, but the water just falls out the bottom. You're not like actually controlling the water, only the earth. But the Avatar can bend both at the same time. So he uses the idea of creating a cup. An earthbender can create the cup, but they lose the water, whereas an Avatar can kind of keep them both together and just make a cup that has water from a big pile of mud. And we see Roku do that directly kind of in front of him. So the plan here is that together they will extract the earth from the mud to form a basin, while Roku extracts the fresh water to replenish the pool. And they're going to continue that until the water runs clear, and then I guess clear out the water from the mud from the rest of the mountain. You can tell that maybe the pacing struggles a little bit here just with the page count, because it just goes from, this is the plan, it's not working, oh wait, it is working like very, very quickly with just like 2 panels of just like if you doubt yourself you will fail. Oh look, it's flowing again. And it has to be really, really quick. We solve the problem. But you sort of get the idea here. They're making the kind of main kind of basin at the top of the mountain that is the source of the water. And they're doing that kind of water extraction. It's just they're gently doing it so that it slowly kind of fixes things. So yeah, we saved my village. No, we saved your home. Race you to the bottom. And they kind of do the race down the mountain. Sud wins. And then we'll get to the kind of end in just a second. But what were your thoughts on how they kind of resolved this problem here on these pages?
Yeah, I mean, I like the philosophy. I like the mentality, the idea of how they can sort of separate them and how Roku is able to sort of, use multiple elements to achieve the results that, maybe one bender couldn't do. So, the whole idea of working together with the elements is here, which is always, something that Avatar has always been about, working with each other and working with the elements to achieve your goals. So I think, that message here is, it's always been held true in Avatar. So I think they got that across pretty clear. And I think, for the panels that they have that they can work with, I think, you get an idea of what what they're going to do here and how it comes across. And I don't know, we've seen it in the show, them sort of extracting, dirt and mud from water and stuff like that. So, in our minds, if you've seen the show, that the process isn't, exactly like a quick thing to do, even though they make it seem sort of like a quick thing that they're doing here in these couple panels here. So I definitely could see how, it might have been nice if they were to able to sort of, show more steps in this process. But I think it comes across clear enough what they're sort of trying to do here, and they're able to sort of save the day and have their sort of race down the mountain again. Although it seems like they're going more in the water than on the earth, which is what we saw before. But it's still cool to see, and he wins, Sud wins.
Yeah, that is an interesting one in terms of like, how much earth-bending control do you have over that? Like a surfboard made of earth, but you're on water. Like, I suppose you can bend it a little bit with the hydrodynamics or whatever, but like it's a bit of a weird one. But yeah, there's some fun references here. Maybe we should clean the river. With the painted lady kind of stuff going on here a little bit as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, they race down the mountain. Sud wins. The villagers all thank them. They actually say the water is clearer than ever. And everyone's really excited. Roku's like, oh, so does that mean we're done for the day? No, one more task you must complete. The cube. And so they go back to working on the cube, with Roku suggesting that tomorrow we should race up the mountain and see who wins. And so it's like, I would love to see that. And that is a direct reference to Avatar the Fire Lord, which is that competition basically that they have exactly. With the one interesting maybe point on the art being just that between days, it seems like Roku changes pants, because he's got Fire Nation kind of pants on here. But of course in that episode he has Earth Kingdom ones. Also on the cover, He has Earth Kingdom ones as well. I'm assuming that's purposeful rather than being a mistake, but it's just interesting that he, I guess, has different colored pants. Does he wear the water bending ones ever? We don't really know. But yes, that is the comic. 10 pages, pretty nice. Any thoughts on the kind of final little sequence here?
No, I think this is, it's a nice quick conclusion, and we get to see sort of the reaction of everything. So no, I think this is nice, and it just sets up that he still needs more training, right? Like he's not the perfect, he's not an earthbending master yet, which is what we see when we do see him, later on in the flashbacks and stuff like that.
Yeah, so yeah, this is him still kind of getting through his training, but beginning to get, I suppose, towards the end. But yeah, that's it. And like I said, we expect to see this comic immediately kind of quote unquote reprinted in Masters of the Elements. It'll be interesting to see what they do with that book, with this like as an example, because just based on how much page counts should be left, all the other kind of comics, the Yang Chen one, the Kyoshi one, and I'm guessing another Korra one, will all be in or around 10, 11, 12 pages each. And I think some people maybe have their expectations through the roof because hype, Yang Chen, Kyoshi. they need to get those stories correct. In that, like, I think people are going to be annoyed if we don't see Rangi in the Kyoshi one. I'm not sure necessarily what people's expectations are for the Yang Chen one, but certainly I think when it comes to Kyoshi, I think people want to see some novel references with that. This Roku one, of course, it was always going to be the one that I think probably most heavily referenced stuff that we already know. Whereas I'm going to guess my expectations with Kyoshi would be that they, at this point, probably would lean more towards the novel material rather than, like, something tied into the Chin the Conqueror incident or something like that. But yeah, what does this comic make you feel about sort of those upcoming stories for two other avatars that we actually know quite a bit about at this point?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I would be surprised if they did something, really new and different like that, because I don't know, it feels like they haven't really been going for that for a while now. Like they've, sort of toned back on sort of the chances and the story beats that they want to tell with these stories, which is unfortunate, but we're assuming that that's done on purpose because of other media and other projects that are coming down the pipeline. So I wouldn't be surprised if they do a small bit of a scene from the books or something like that, or something that we know, or even if it's something from like maybe like some sort of like extended lore that they've never really talked about, but it would be cool to get to see it sort of visually. That might be neat to have as well. So I don't know, we'll have to wait and see.
But yeah, that will be exciting when we do get to Masters of the Elements, and then we also know that is a volume 1, so we're expecting a volume 2. So Roku will probably get another story in volume 2, and they've sort of covered a lot of his training at this point, so that would hopefully be something maybe a little bit more unique. It'd be kind of cool to cover more of the kind of RPG era where he's kind of just out there preventing various kind of issues all over the world. They have a lot of openings to do stuff with. But yeah, we'll move on from the Free Comic Book Day book to another very interesting release, and that is our first ever like proper single issue for Avatar Comics. This is the Kyoshi Warriors miniseries. We got issue number 1 of 3 just earlier this week on Wednesday. And interestingly, they had the advertisement in the free comic ready to go because it was the following week's releases, so it all worked out pretty perfectly for them here. But yeah, this is quite unique overall. That like we're gonna get this. The next issue is in like 6 weeks, and then it's only a month after that. Monthly issues, we've never had this before. What are your thoughts just on the format of this? We're getting miniseries.
I don't know. I'm half and half on if I really like this format. I know we've talked about this for a while, that this would be like a cool thing that they could do and sort of have content sort of like continuously sort of flowing and stuff like that. And I like the idea of that. Sounds good, but I'm not sure if just one of those in my mind is sort of like enough. Like if they were doing, one for, Aang's era, one for Korra's era, and maybe one for, whatever the other future eras might be, maybe I might be more into it. I think the story is cool, and I think, we'll have fun talking about it, and it'll be really cool when we get to see the full thing in its entirety. But this is really just sort of like a snippet of a snippet in terms of like the whole thing of what we get. So I don't know. I have to see how I really feel about it once we finally get sort of like all the pieces, which will be for a while.
Yeah, like it is an interesting one because on one hand it is a new format, but on another hand it's not really, because it's just these three together will make actually less page count than one-shot comic. 66 versus 72 pages. So is it just a one-shot split up over 3 months? And what does that mean for the format? Is it actually that different when you really break it down? Because yeah, what we've definitely been asking for is more regular content. Like especially the current schedule for the other comics is very rough. Like it's going to be nearly like a year and a half between Korra comics, the Mako and the Kaya comic. It's going to be the same basically for the Ashes of the Academy into the Jet comic. That's not good enough considering like how much like page count, how much content we actually get. This is cool to have, but like already we know that like there's no issue like the month after issue 3 I think we know they are going to continue with miniseries more or less in the background, because the writer here does seem to be working on other stuff, but we don't know what the schedule is. And if this doesn't actually lead to us getting like I don't know, in a year, like, okay, they're not doing 12 issues a year, but like if this isn't like at least like 8-9 issues a year, if we're skipping too many months, like it's not actually that different than other formats necessarily. It's just like another creative team. And especially because we know they, even in this miniseries, they have to switch artists like halfway through. It's a bit like, what's going on here? Do the Avatar comics just have crazy high art standards compared to other comics? I'm not really sure on that. But any other thoughts on that just before we kind of jump into the actual review?
Yeah, no, I think that definitely is something to consider. It really does feel like it's just sort of, it almost seems like it's exactly like sort of what we've been getting from before, just that we're actually getting less in what we're actually receiving to read, which I don't know, doesn't really speak well on sort of, us as sort of like, the fans and the users, getting this sort of idea. Like maybe it works out better for them profit wise because, they're single issues and that's better than sort of the whole collectiveness. So maybe it's just sort of like a corporate reason of why they're doing this, which, I can get to some degree, but that's not something I, like personally, of course. So yeah, I don't know. It's weird, and I do wonder, like you're saying there, like is just sort of like an expectation things, or is it just like a scheduling thing, and things just sort of never seem to align right? I mean, I don't know. I don't follow a lot of comics, so I don't know, as much of issues as other comics might have during their runs and stuff like that. So I don't know if this is more of a unique thing, or if this is just sort of a standard industry thing that us as people who aren't in the comics as much always should just be used to.
Yeah, at the very least, it looks like it's effectively like doubling the normal output for Avatar comics, in that like we're going to get a miniseries, we're also getting the Jet comic. They're two separate creative teams. We know there's two more coming from the Faith Aaron Hicks creative team. We basically know probably this team is kind of going to continue on to whatever the next miniseries is. It's just the question of like, are they going to do the same for Korra? And if it is doubling both of them, that's good on the Korra side of things, because the one shots seem very slow on that side of things. And then with the Masters of the Elements also being a volume thing, we don't know how regular that's going to be. They are increasing the output, but it's also like, can we get back to the big stories as well, and do things change as well? So I think it's a positive step forward. It's just, you also want to see what the evolution of the comics is going into this kind of new era, because just more kind of one shots or stuff that's like one shots is not everything that people have been asking for. So I definitely want to see some expansion, but we will get into this here. So we have issue 1 here of the Kyoshi Warriors. So let's jump into this here. Our creative team here is story or written by Brandon Huang, art here by Belle Bessa, colors by Adele Matera, letters by Comic Craft's Jimmy Betancourt and Tyler Smith, and cover is by Danny Wares. The description here at the start, I'll just read this out. Suki and the Kyoshi Warriors leave their island home to join the war against the Fire Nation. Met with suspicion and resentment by the mainlanders, they struggle to prove their worth to the Earth Kingdom. But when that opportunity arises, will they be willing to compromise their values as Kyoshi Warriors to embrace it? So that's the overall description for like the full series. And we'll get into overall thoughts. Issue 1, we have 22 pages here to go over. What were your thoughts on the first third of this story?
I think it's a good way to sort of start off this sort of idea of their sort of, I guess, reintroduction into the mainland, into the world at large. And I don't know, it's interesting to just to see sort of the history of the Kyoshi Warriors and how that precedes them, and how their own sort of expectations are reflected on the people that they interact with. I think that probably is sort of the most interesting part of this. And I don't know, it's curious just to see sort of what we would think would be that sort of reception, because we've seen the show, right? So we know where they eventually end up with. So this is us getting to see their sort of journey towards that sort of acceptance, or at least what we assume is acceptance when we see them in the show. Maybe it isn't as good as we see them later on, or there's more to it. So I don't know, this is one that where they're not like the most important characters, even though everyone really does like Suki, and there's the whole thing about where's Suki and stuff like that. And sort of like the grand scheme of things, maybe that's not sort of as important. So, but I'm real curious to see how this plays out overall. But I think this is a good start towards their journey and them sort of dealing with that sort of issue.
My own thoughts are that I thought it was a pretty good opening start to this. Obviously it's filling in a gap between the first two appearances in the show of Suki. Seems like we're much closer to the first appearance than the second one, though they don't exactly explain where it is. But the Suki seems to leave Kyoshi Island fairly shortly after 104, as we see in Suki Alone. And this is not that long afterwards, even though there's definitely some day time skips that we get in this. The idea is that I guess we're still in early to mid book one while this is happening with the Kyoshi Warriors. So it's cool. Finally kind of, getting to learn more about the rest of the Kyoshi Warriors, as while still also giving Suki an arc to herself. And then, yeah, like you talked about, the idea of they've been they kept out of the war. The island is known for being kind of isolationist. Do people know much about them? And you get that sense where different people know different things or have heard different things about the Kyoshi Warriors. Some of it actually seems to maybe be more of Avatar Kyoshi's reputation of being applied to them, maybe more so than the warriors themselves. And what I really like that made me like much more interested in the series was that they seem to be bringing them into the actual like war aspect of the 100-Year War. They're going to join up with the army. We're going into a battle. Like issue 2 looks to be super action packed, and I'm actually quite excited where this one ends off. So I quite like what we do here. It's definitely mostly setup in this one, but you have to have the setup. Just before we start, actually, I do want to ask you this question, and that is that one of the unique things about this is, of course, naming and introducing those other Kyoshi Warriors. After issue 1, do you feel you can tell apart who is who, which one is each name based on like what personality that they have?
So I feel like they did a good job on the personality wise and the characters and stuff like that. So I think in terms of making them unique and stand out and not feel like all part of a hodgepodge unit, I think they did a good job on that. I think in terms of connecting them with the names, I don't think I have that as done well. And that might be because of the short page count of this just being, 22 pages and stuff like that. Like, I would suspect by the end of the full thing, I would be, up on their names individually. But right now, I don't think I am.
Yeah, because I did like a video review and stuff like that, like I feel like that put it into my head, so I have it down. But I do think it was done relatively well. There's definitely 4 distinct personalities there. They do all have unique kind of hairstyles. And actually, maybe one of the only maybe tricky parts is that they do change outfits a lot. So like there's 4 characters that each go through like 3 outfit changes in this. So you're trying to keep track of them as they look with their kind of Kyoshi Warrior gear on, in their Kyoshi Island outfit, and in their soldier outfit, and that maybe is where it gets like a little bit like confusing. Interestingly, they seem to mostly keep it on track. The only quote unquote mistake is literally just from the cover to the interior. They mixed up the headdress for Mira and Fume. Basically, the triangle and the 2 circles, the headdresses are like swapped. On the cover, Mira has the triangle, but in the actual comic, she has the 2 circles. I'm not sure if that's just like a concept thing, because of course the cover artist is different, and like they just committed to whatever the actual artist went with. It'll be interesting to follow that, just to see if they do or don't make that mistake kind of as we go forward, just because of how kind of set this comic seems to be on trying to make them all unique and distinct. But we'll get into it here. So we open up with them having basically arrived at the mainland here. They're unloading their ship here. They're at a dock. There's a fisherman right there. Interestingly, straight away, like the first lines of dialogue in the book, Mira, that's my bag. Oh, my mistake, Rie. Here, Fume, you dropped your book. Thanks, Aika. So immediately they name the other four. They don't need to name Suki. You know who Suki is, but they need to name the other one. And Suki immediately tells us that they are trying to link up with the Earth Kingdom army, and they're looking for directions from this fisherman. He's like, not sure why you kids would want to do a foolish thing like that. And they kind of are like, no, look, this is what we're trying to do. Can you help us? We know what we're about. And he just says, the army is always on the move, but you might have a look at Pebble Pond Village. It's quite a journey, though. But I do have some ostrich horses I could loan you for the right price. They hand over some money, but he doesn't recognize this money because they're so disconnected. This random fisherman doesn't know what Kyoshi Island money is. So he thinks it might be a scam. We see here, this is Rie tries to say, we'd never dream of trying to scam you. We're the Kyoshi Warriors, and he freaks out at this. Like his hat hops off his head. He drops the money, gives it back to them. Please don't tie me up in seaweed and slice off my ears with your vengeance, fans. Take the ostrich horses free of charge. Keep them. Mira is then the one to say, I say that the Kyoshi Warriors' glorious return to the mainland is going rather well. Eh, Suki? So they're a little bit baffled by that reaction, but they have directions, they know where they're going, and they have some ostrich horses for free, basically. What are your thoughts on these opening pages?
Yeah, this definitely sort of sets the tone for how they might be potentially received, because that feels very sort of abrupt, and you can see in their reactions that that's not sort of what they were going to, they just thought they would be able to communicate sort of easily. But even just the idea of the money sort of being different, and we've seen that in the show, them trying to use like water tribe money in different places, right? Like the currency isn't universal, like the world in Avatar, at least at this point in time, isn't set up in such a way that you have to have the money that's local to the region that you're in, and them being from the island, their money doesn't seem like it's going to be able to sort of work directly there, even if it it is gold, like there has to be some proof to that or whatever. So I thought this was definitely an interesting setup in terms of how they're going to be potentially received going forward here.
Mm-hmm. Next page, we see them on ostrich horse. So they travel quite a distance. They kind of camp out. There's at least a day or two that kind of pass just over this page. At one time when they camp down, we begin to get some of their personalities across. Mira says about Rie that you're spoiling that ostrich horse by kind of feeding it so much. Don't expect me to share my lunch when she comes over for yours. We see Suki says to Aika that like you don't over sharpen your sword there, it might slice through your sheath. And Ike is the one to point out that but what about the Fire Nation? They'll probably have made significant improvements to their armor. We need to be ready for that. And then off to the side, Fume is over by the tree messing around with some kind of like butterfly lizard things. The diversity of the flora and fauna on the mainland continues to astound me. So there's your kind of general idea of their kind of personalities overall. Aika is quite warrior, kind of focused on like their gear and stuff like that. Later on, we'll find out that very much that kind of warrior honor is a big part of what she's about. Mira is the most sort of like outspoken and like emotional kind of one of the group. Fume is kind of somewhat quiet, but is very focused on kind of what's around her, especially the animals and the kind of plants and stuff like that. And then Rie is quite kind of serious and kind of concerned. She's very affected by the way people feel about the Kyoshi Warriors. That's the kind of presentation so far. But what are your thoughts here on that? This is probably the first real page where we get into their individual personalities.
Yeah, no, I thought this was very good. I thought it came across very clear, sort of what their interests are, sort of what their focus, how they sort of react to the new environment that they're in. I mean, I think even from the beginning you can start to see a little bit of this in how they sort of communicate with the farmer, but when they're just sitting there talking with each other, I think it really comes across really well, and I think that's when you get the really get the idea across that they're all individual people and all have their own sort of ways of dealing with things, and we're going to have to see how they react to all of the sort of interactions that they have coming forward, which I think you definitely get to see that played out by the end of this book.
Mm-hmm. Interestingly, the next panel, they seem to just get directions, no problem, from the next person that they meet. But Rie is lost in thought about the fisherman. He was scared of us. Like, we're here to help. She can't kind of combine these two things in her mind, that, like, they're just here to help, but randomly he's afraid of us. Fume kind of comes in with the logic. You must remember, no one from the mainland has seen a Kyoshi warrior in person before. It'll take some getting used to. And Mira highlights that they'll prove themselves when we bag some fire army brutes, and that's when they'll realize the greatness of the Kyoshi warriors. So we'll prove it with our actions. They head into town. It's Pebble Pond Village, and they get a frosty reception here. Suki tries to introduce herself. No one is responding, so she's forced to sort of scream out in the middle of the city. We're trying to find the Earth Kingdom army. We're the Kyoshi Warriors, please. And this is where we get the kind of expected reaction. You want us to help you? That's rich. About time the legendary warriors showed us. Must have gotten bored on that little island. Go home. And then again, we get the reaction of all 5 members of the group, which again gets across their personality. Mira, the most vocal one, is like fit to burst basically here. She's so angry. Fume tries to kind of calm things down a little bit with logic. Aika, it comes across as like her honor has been kind of besmirched here, and Rie is just kind of and Suki are both very just concerned about the situation, that this is the reception that they're getting. And we'll stop it there because we get a character introduction up next. But what are your thoughts on their introduction into Pebble Pond Village?
Yeah, I mean, I guess considering how the farmer reacted to them, might not be too surprising that a lot of them, especially with them sort of being very vocal and needing help in this moment, wasn't received very well here. And I don't know, I think, like you said, it's good that we are able to get to see each of their sort of reactions towards, the crowd, the sort of mob mentality against them here. And I don't know, I guess they really sort of thought, maybe a bit naively, that they would be a lot more, better received than they currently are here. But, they have been away for many years. I mean, the war has been going on for quite a while. Like, they're probably like, maybe the second generation or 2 or 3 or however many, Kyoshi warriors that haven't been involved with the war directly here. So a lot of people would understandably, harbor some resentment against them.
Mm-hmm. And there's also an element of this, like we saw this with some of the reception Aang got in the early episodes as well, like the storm especially, that fisherman. That's the exact same thing here. You weren't here during the war, and that's what all they kind of really care about. And it's the same thing with the Kyoshi Warriors. So that's an interesting kind of comparison here, because it is, Team Avatar having to experience that, but this time the whole team have to kind of encounter that. But then we see this kind of boy pushes through the crowd. He's like, excuse me, pardon me, coming through. He trips and his basket of skunk squid goes flying, hits all the villagers, so he kind of clears them off. This is going to get worse before it gets better. They kind of stink up the place. This is where Suki introduces herself. She kind of picks him up off the ground. He introduces himself. His name is Bun. Fume, of course, picks up the skunk squid. Is like, interesting. And then, she introduces the others to him. Again, they are the Kyoshi Warriors, and he's quite happy about this. That must mean you're here to help us take on the Fire Nation, right? Of course I'm right. You must be trying to find the army. A Kyoshi Warrior always lends her hand to those in need, and he will guide them to the army. And so we go to the next page, and we see that this is the army headquarters. Actually, it's my uncle's house, but the army is borrowing it while stationed here. The general is going to flip when she sees you. Go ahead, I'll wait for you. So here's how they found their way to at least one kind of headquarters of the Earth Kingdom army, thanks to this character who will come back, named Bun here, who's quite clumsy. So what are your thoughts on the introduction of Bun here?
Yeah, no, his introduction is fun. The skunk squad are interesting. That's sort of the the hybrid that they chose to have for this character here and his sort of introduction. I guess it sort of fits with sort of what we find out about him later on and everything like that. So I guess it's not, no, it's not sort of too out there, but they seem to at least be able to handle the smell very well, considering that everyone else sort of scattered pretty quickly here, or maybe they're just being nice because this is the first person that really is willing to sort of like talk with them and guide them to where they need to go here. So no, I like this little, sort of connection moment that they have.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, they head inside, all five of them, and they see the general here. This is General Andal. And she is in front of a kind of map here, obviously planning things out. She's got her assistant there. It's hard to get a full sense for where exactly we are. We're obviously somewhere kind of southern Earth Kingdom because, like, they, of course, came to, I suppose, the closest point to Kyoshi Island and have traveled a little bit since then.
Yeah.
It's hard to know for sure. I think the closest places we're familiar with on the map are that, like, Gowling isn't actually that far away, and, like, actually the Foggy Swamp isn't actually too far away either, but we actually just don't know the layout specifically here. But anyway, the general is like, well, this is certainly a surprise. I never thought I'd live to see the mighty Kyoshi Warriors with my own eyes. Welcome home. Suki says, with all due respect, General, the Kyoshi Warriors took a vow to protect our island. Our island is Earth Kingdom. It always has been. We've come to offer our assistance in driving the Fire Nation from the kingdom. Little late to the party then, aren't we? We're here now, General. I suggest you use us. So, not the worst reception, but there's definitely a little bit of that kind of guilt tripping beginning to kind of start here, as we'll see over the coming pages here. But it is interesting to get that moment of, like, Suki kind of reflecting the idea of, like, okay, we're isolated from the mainland, but we are still Earth Kingdom. That, like, when Kyoshi separated it, it wasn't making it its own nation. It's just physically separating it from the mainland. So an interesting one there. And the general does say that she's a bit of a history buff when it comes to Kyoshi Island and its customs, but she doesn't recall the warriors training such young recruits. Suki has to defend that, we may be teenagers, but I assure you we can fight. She doesn't doubt their prowess, but even after all this time, the exploits of Avatar Kyoshi and her legendary warriors still inspire my soldiers. We see on her arm she has some sort of a scar/burn. You remind me of when I first enlisted. I wasn't much older than you. And she says that I don't mean any disrespect, but sparring with your sisters is very different than facing a soldier who intends to burn you from existence. And we'll get into the rest of this in just a second. But what are your thoughts on the introduction to the general here, General Andal?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, the general is at least able to give like a second to sort of think about, sort of this new team, new asset that they can have at their sort of disposal here, so they don't sort of immediately dismiss this as such of, the people in the village did. So, they're at least able to sort of think this through a little bit, even if they do, a little bit of underhanded sort of talking here, just because, they have, sort of been out of the war for so long here. And, the war has been going on for quite a while. So the fact that, no one has heard of any sort of Kyoshi warriors sort of interacting with the mainland in a long time, this is a cause for surprise. It is sort of funny that they just happen to come to a person that sort of is, rather aware of Kyoshi Island and sort of what goes on there, at least to some degree. So I don't know. It makes me sort of wonder, sort of, at large, I mean, I guess we can see from, sort of the village here, what people really sort of think of the warriors. I mean, clearly, and we can understand why. We've read the Kyoshi book, why there might be a reputation that they would have as, sort of warriors in general, even if they aren't, Kyoshi, they don't have any of her powers, but they have sort of that mentality, or at least that's what people suspect here. So it definitely is something to see, sort of the back and forth here of them sort of trying to, actually do something different, trying to work with people here, but their reception is still rather frosty here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting, like the whole I'm a history buff on Kyoshi Island, because that would mean that she probably has to have at least like 100 years out of date information, I guess, and just know that, I guess, she'd know the story that we got in Shells, which is like the origin of the Kyoshi Warriors, which was Kyoshi training women who were basically being harassed by like rowdy sailors on Yokoya. This was before the island was kind of split and stuff like that, and like bandits, and so I guess they would be training kind of grown women in that case. But I guess since then, we also know from Suki's backstory, she always dreamt of being a Kyoshi warrior, so I guess she joined as soon as possible, and we know how talented she is, so that's probably one aspect to it as well. But yeah, there's some really cool setup here in that the idea of like teenage soldier here and all. Like, that's interesting. Like, she's been in the war for a long time, like from her point of view. That's very interesting, and trying to present the idea of, I'm more experienced than you don't have at least much experience facing actual soldiers. She's obviously not aware of the Zuko attack that literally did just happen, but that's an interesting kind of angle to be like, hey, we do this every day. We have these fights against the Fire Nation. People die. That's kind of what's being alluded to here, and that's interesting. Just to get that kind of slight tone shift already here. We'll get it again towards the end of the issue as well. But the Kyoshi Warriors, they just say, we just want a chance to prove our worth to the citizens of the Earth Kingdom to make up for lost time. She says, stubborn, determined, these traits will serve you well if honed. What do you say to the Kyoshi Warriors being official soldiers of the Earth Kingdom army under my command? Stick with me and someday you'll make a great leader, Suki. Stay vigilant, you'll find your way. She then highlights that my scouts have discovered a new Fire Nation outpost. Rumor has it that General Yuze is stationed there. I want that outpost taken at all costs. We see a kind of wanted picture, basically, of General Yuze. And a rough idea of the kind of layout of what we're dealing with here. And yeah, she highlights, perhaps it's fate that you five have shown up on my doorstep on the eve of this righteous assault, a serendipitous opportunity for the Kyoshi Warriors to repay a debt to their nation. And Suki just says, the Kyoshi Warriors are at your disposal, General. Spoken like a true soldier, get some rest, girls, we move out at first light. So, not too bad here, but definitely some hints of kind of manipulation here, just over the idea of like, oh, you're a young leader, I'm a more experienced leader, I'll get you to where you need to be. Getting her to kind of agree to a more maybe specific joining up of the Earth Kingdom army than maybe Suki wanted in the first place. And then a little bit of a setup for like, perhaps is the scar that Andal has, is it from General Yuze? Is this a quite personal fight between these two generals? And is that why it's at all costs? Like, there'll be sacrifices being made here that, of course, the Kyoshi Warriors won't agree with. So I like this one. There's a lot you can read into with some of these pieces of dialogue because we don't know Andal that well. But what are your thoughts on this back and forth between the kind of two leaders here?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know, this is sort of something that we always see sort of with the younger group trying to integrate with the older and the more experienced group. And I don't know, this feels very much so like what we've seen in the past of Earth Kingdom sort of generals and commanders sort of doing. I mean, I guess that's just sort of like, I don't know, the military structure and its hierarchy in general. So, there's only so much you can do within that sort of structure because that's how they function and that's how they work. And, it's worked for the past 100 years, so there's precedence for them making sense why they've been acting the way that they have here, but it definitely feels like it could go sort of either way in the future where they generally sort of like conflict and have sort of a butting of opinions and ideas, which causes issues later on that they're going to have to deal with, or maybe they'll be able to find some sort of common ground with sort of the extremes of the situation that's going on. So that's sort of like up in the air right now, but at least they know sort of what the objective is and what they're sort of hoping to accomplish here. And at least as of now, they're willing to go under the leadership of someone who has assuming more experience than what they have right now. So I don't know, it definitely is sort of setting you up for giving you the option of things that can go either way.
Next page, we cut to the Kyoshi Warriors who are staying at Bun's house. This is a weird one just because, like, I'm not entirely sure, like, are these Bun's parents or is this like his uncle and his uncle's wife? It is a different house, but of course the house has been given over to the army. So is this just where they're all staying together. As we kind of go through this, it's like these two, they definitely care for Bun, but it feels like the writing would have been a little bit different if they were his parents. There's a few moments where it feels like a little bit more should be said. I don't know. It's just that weird thing where it's technically not confirmed exactly who these two are. What way did you interpret this dynamic of Bun and his guardians, I guess, in this situation?
Yeah, no, that's true. That is something that I was wondering as well, because it didn't feel like it had as much familiarity as, parents would have, especially with their child, what eventually sort of happens to him later on. So I don't know. I'm wondering why they wouldn't make that more clear what's going on, or other than just they didn't have the page count or something like that to do here. So I don't know. It seems like they care for him enough. They don't necessarily want, what he's going to do later on. They didn't seem, I don't know, maybe as heartfelt about it, but I don't know. That is a weird one.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, Suki's like, thank you for opening your home to us. It's our pleasure. Fume notes about the flavor. The mainland has such complex delicacies. His uncle or father asks, why aren't you eating? Eat, you need your strength. Who can eat when we're on the eve of battle? And so Suki's like, wait, you're fighting? And he says, they couldn't keep me away. Hoping to bring home a real Fire Nation dagger for my parents. And then we cut to Suki looking at his parents. It's a bit of a weird one, like, but they're right there, like he's bringing it home for them, and or are the parents elsewhere? And this is the uncle unable to convince him. I'm not fully sure on that. But anyway, Mira then gets on her feet, kind of in a way boisterous as ever. Get on your feet, soldier. Show us what you've got. She takes out her fan. He picks up a wooden sword and kind of charges at her. And I'm not even sure she does touch him. She says she barely touched him. She gives him the lightest of light trips and he goes like flipping, basically. So they further highlight kind of how clumsy he is. And he actively wants to go out into battle here. But clearly Suki is quite concerned about this turn of events because, as she says, Bun is not a soldier. You can't let him fight. They then say, it's out of our hands. Bun enlisted last week. He'll be the youngest recruit in our village's history. You can pay your way out of service, but we don't have that kind of money. This is our last dinner together before he goes to war. And Suki looks very, very concerned about this because clearly the parents, everyone knows that if he goes to war, he's probably going to die because they probably have a better sense for what the battlefield is like kind of upcoming, because we'll see that at the end of the issue. But an interesting kind of turn of events here. What are your thoughts on this part of the book?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's, I think you could understand sort of why, he might potentially want to do it, especially with him being a younger character and stuff like that. I mean, that's, the Kyoshi Warriors are sort of the same mindset, just that they have, the training and the experience, which Bun clearly doesn't have, which, I don't know, it seems kind of odd that he's sort of enlisted and going straight into it, but, they've been doing this war for a while, so they need, all the people they can at this point, so I don't know, it definitely is something, but I do like that, there is concern on Suki, like she realizes the situation that's going on here, and, later on we get to see that other two sort of, understand it or empathetic towards it as well here. So it definitely is something to see here, how doesn't really seem like this is something that he's going to do well at.
Mm-hmm. That night, Suki can't get to sleep, and we see Fume and Rie wake up, and we see their, I suppose, fourth look in the comic, kind of bedhead versions of them. Rie says, Fume and I are worried also. Mira and Aika then also get up, and they have this kind of discussion here. We're asking Suki to talk to General Andal about keeping Bun behind. Aika says Bun has every right to serve his nation. Fume says even if that means sending him to his death. Mira says that's his choice, Fume. He deserves a chance to earn honor. And we see the interesting panel layout here of Fume and Rie on one side caring about Bun's welfare versus the kind of honor of a warrior aspect from Aika and Mira, whereas Suki's obviously very in the middle on this, kind of understanding both of these approaches. but she's the leader. If they're going to make a decision on this, it has to be her. She says, Bun should make his own decisions, but we can save a life by intervening, shouldn't we? I don't know. I don't know what the right call is. And we cut to kind of the other two on each side of this, and you can tell that none of them also know exactly the right kind of approach in this. So they put out the candle, get some sleep, we have a big day tomorrow. This is definitely one of the kind of better scenes in the book. I think just kind of highlighting a bit of a disagreement here. You see what kind of drives each of them, the kind of the more kind of caring kind of two versus the two that are maybe the most kind of warrior centric of the two. So this is a pretty nice one, and then highlighting the leadership issue for Suki. So what are your thoughts on this kind of late night conversation they have?
No, I agree. I think this is, you know, it's just another instance where we can highlight their personalities and sort of how they view on sort of, you know, working in the war, how people should be involved with it, and, you know, this new character that they, you know, that they've befriended here. So, and they can see, you know, they've interacted with him a bit, they understand his relatives, his guardians, you know, their family and their sort of perspective of it. So I think, you know, they definitely have a good idea of what, you know, this war, at least initially, sort of entails here. So they sort of don't think that Bun has sort of the greatest grasp of things, as well as the ability to sort of come out of this sort of unscathed. So definitely put Suki in a tough decision here, and the way that they set this up, I think it's really good. I think this is great that we get to see this sort of conflict of interest right in the beginning here, and it's something that's going to, you know, potentially go throughout the whole book.
Mm-hmm. That morning, the Kyoshi Warriors get ready, so they get into their kind of classic outfits here. They put the face paint on, of course, the Avatar Kyoshi, or the Flying Opera Company face paint, as we kind of fully know the story now. Fume asks, have you decided what you're going to do about Bun? It's also complicated. Why should I have to decide? Rie says, you're our leader, Suki. Lead. And so her makeup has been finished. And yeah, she does go over to General Andal to talk to her. General Andal, as everyone's getting ready, the victory is on our side today. May I have a word? I ask that you spare Bun from participating in this mission. He will not survive. He is not a fighter. Andal says, I respectfully disagree with your assessment, Suki. To the untrained eye, he is a boy, but I see an unshakable soul of a warrior and an insatiable hunger for valor. It's a citizen's duty to protect their kingdom. General, please. And then Andal says, this boy's safety means a great deal to you. It's highly unorthodox, but I'll grant you an exception. So she calls Bun over and is basically like, this young lady has put in a special request that you stay home. And he's like, what? I was like, I miss out on the action, but all my friends are going to fight. And she says, Bun, you don't have to do this. He gets quite annoyed here and says, yes, I do. And if you don't get that, then maybe you don't understand what it is to be a warrior. Andal seems quite smug about this. Our soldier has spoken. Bun will join the first attack. Honorable, very honorable. Aika, I think it is, then says, you got this, Bun. We won't let anything happen to you. So they are going to defend him in the battle, and they're going to head off to knock some Fire Nation heads. So yeah, this hasn't gone very well. Suki has kind of erred on the side of we want to kind of protect him, but she kind of just does Andal handle this kind of well or not? She wants another person out there on the battlefield, I guess, and she just kind of plays to the idea that she knows he's really passionate about this, and so really kind of throws Suki under the bus here by saying, like, she doesn't believe in you almost, and that's the way this kind of resolves itself. So yeah, it puts the Kyoshi Warriors in an interesting position going into the battle where, as we'll see, they have to protect him, but there's other stuff going on as well. So what are your thoughts on this interaction?
Yeah, it's definitely, you know, works towards the general sort of advantage here in terms of like turning the tables on what they thought, or what Suki thought would be sort of like a kind act, a sort of noble act of maybe, you know, not having someone sort of right in the front of things that could potentially get sort of hurt here. But, you know, I think you could, you know, understand that Bun would probably be, you know, he would want to be, you know, in the thick of things. Whether that's good or bad, you know, we'll have to wait and see. But, you know, that's his current mentality, that's why he was so sort of excited to see the Kyoshi Warriors. So, him reacting this way, it kind of seems sort of expected, and I think, the general probably sort of knew this, and this is just sort of another sort of, it almost seems just like a manipulation, another sort of notch in terms of her using that to sort of control the Kyoshi Warriors in this sort of situation. And we get to see how this is almost sort of immediately used in the next sort of panels here.
Mm-hmm. Then Andal immediately switches and is like, okay, now that's settled, and then just relays a bunch of stuff to the Kyoshi Warriors, but it's mostly to her assistant. Now, addressing your attire, I want that makeup wiped off, their swords, war fans, and wrist shields stowed. They'll need regulation spears. Let's get them fitted in proper uniform. Fume tries to point out that as Kyoshi Warriors will be more proficient if we are allowed to use the tools we've trained with our whole lives. Nonsense. You can't wear and wield whatever you want in the Earth Kingdom army. What kind of precedent would that set? One boulder is deadlier than a handful of pebbles. We are an army, we fight as one. You are Earth Kingdom soldiers now. Rie asks Suki, like, how do you feel about this? And Suki says, maybe being a leader is knowing when to take orders. General Andal has been doing this a lot longer than me. Let's fall in line. And there's a real sense where, like, this is probably where Suki really should kind of fight against this, but because she's been so badly undermined over the whole kind of like Bun situation, she is lacking in confidence for this kind of moment here. So Andal's kind of manipulations have kind of worked well here. But this is also a really interesting one in terms of, like, is this like incompetence from Andal, or is this just really trying to keep a cohesive unit with the army? Like, is there actually a concern over letting the Kyoshi Warriors be Kyoshi Warriors on the battlefield? It's an interesting point, because we've seen this before with other high-ranking Earth Kingdom military generals, like General Fong in the Avatar State, Sung in the Drill. Some of them kind of know what they're doing to a certain degree, but not fully. What was your take on this one here? Where, like, okay, she keeps Bun in her squad so she doesn't lose a soldier, but being against the Kyoshi Warriors kind of equipment, what are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. It feels like it's more just sort of like a setup for manipulation of just sort of trying to control them and sort of undermine what they're actually going to do, rather than using them as sort of like, highly skilled, people that they actually are. Now, granted, at this point in time, she knows sort of like the history, so maybe you could say that, she should know how good they are or what they could potentially do. But, she hasn't sort of necessarily seen it in action, so maybe, there's an idea there of why she's not just letting them go on their own, because, it does set up precedence. You can't see how, they would stand out from the rest of the army, right? Like that, it's a sort of a thing that you can see there. But we have seen that there are specialized groups within the army, right? Like there's the terror squad and stuff like that. So, like, it's not like the Earth Kingdom army isn't sort of super opposed of having sort of like specialized groups. So that's where it feels here, where there's maybe something bigger at play here, where if she was really thinking about it, she could have used them more effectively in the coming sort of battle here.
Yeah, and it feels like we're almost building towards, like, does she have tactics that are just like really, really sacrificial of her troops, and so it's easier if no one stands out, that it is just like a whole group that gets smaller rather than a bunch of individuals, and there's that aspect to it. There's definitely something kind of more here about why this is her tactics overall. But we cut to the next page, and yeah, we have the Kyoshi Warriors in there now, Earth Kingdom soldier attire here. And they're all pretty unhappy about this, again, in various kind of characterful ways. You can see kind of Mira, once again, kind of about to kind of explode a little bit here. Fume kind of just looking down, lacking in confidence. Suki, very annoyed at the situation, but not really knowing what to do kind of otherwise. But yeah, now you're fit to fight, let's move out. And they head out, and we get Bun saying goodbye, I guess, to his parents or uncle. I'm again, hopefully we'll get clarification on that at some point. Then we get this very interesting kind of moment, which is that the army on the march start to sing this Earth Kingdom Army song. Mountains will rise, the earth will quake, our enemies will fold. Hoist the banner, shine your spears, roll out the green and gold. Our soldiers strong, our fighters fierce, our hearts brave and bold. Hoist the banner, shine your spears, roll out the green and gold. And while this is happening, it's Bun and the Earth Kingdom soldiers singing it. And the Kyoshi Warriors are all really kind of down about this whole situation. But then Mira starts to belt it out, and everyone else is like, what are you doing? And that's a sudden change. The others start to sing, then Suki sings as well. Like, okay, I guess we're part of the army, we'll get involved with this, we will all be one, I guess. Bun then notices off in the distance our siblings returning from the front, and we see the wounded soldiers coming back. Andal, at least this is a kind of decent thing to do, gets out of their way. You know, they get the road, we'll take the shortcut to the battlefield, give them the road. They come back, and we just get this real sudden tone shift in the comic where we see tons and tons of injured Earth Kingdom soldiers coming back. Clearly lots of burns, lots of injuries, people potentially missing an eye in some cases. Given, I think, the age rating of the comics, like they lay it on fairly thick here without going into full on like novel kind of age rating kind of territory. And so, yeah, we just end with everyone seeing this kind of the contrast of the song they were singing versus the tragedy of who's coming back from the battle. Rie again asks Suki, are we really prepared to go through with this? It's what we've been training for our whole lives. It's why we left home. If we watch out for one another, we'll be okay. I hope, as we see a particularly injured character on the back of a wagon who I don't know if this is on purpose, but looks kind of on the younger side, not Bun young, but like youngish. And is that what's going to happen here? And of course we see the smoke from fire off in the distance, as in like, what are we walking into here? And that's the to be continued. So what are your thoughts on this kind of tonal shift here at the end on the march and then seeing the wounded soldiers?
Yeah, no, it definitely, is, the banner, the march, the sort of, chant going into battle here, which is, pretty standard. And, I think it's something of note that the Kyoshi Warriors eventually do sort of join in on it, even if they're not sort of like, fully sort of committed to the idea of it yet, but they're, at least attempting to be part of the unit, part of the whole, right? So this is sort of a different mentality that they're used to actually having. But yeah, it does very quickly sort of shift over in terms of actually seeing sort of the horrors of the war and what they're actually going to have to sort of deal with here. So I think it's, it's an interesting way for them to sort of realize what they're actually getting involved with here, which, they've seen maybe a little bit of it with their home on their island here, but they haven't really, they don't really know the full scope of things, and this is their real sort of first experience of it. So it's definitely something they're going to have to sort of prepare themselves for.
Mm-hmm. So it's actually a pretty good cliffhanger ending here, because it means issue 2 is going to be pretty action-packed. Like, I assume we'll just get like a page or two set up as we directly get to the battlefield, and then we'll get into it. We'll have to be, I guess, introduced to some of the Fire Nation kind of side of things, and we see what exactly is going on here. Like, are the Earth Kingdom forces losing? Are we holding here? What's the significance of this battle? Is it really for anything, or is it just a random battle? Plus the more personal side of things, how will the Kyoshi Warriors do, not able to use their proper equipment? The assumption would be that, okay, they're maybe not directly trained with the kind of classic spears, but they should be okay. But will they be able to protect Bun in all of this as well? It's interesting because we don't really know kind of like, are they going to commit to anything in terms of like, I'd be really surprised if they killed off Bun. I just don't think that's the brutal kind of thing they kind of want to do in a comic like this, but who knows, we might see something like that. I do think for me, probably maybe the more interesting thing is I'm interested to see kind of what the dynamic is, what maybe the twist is with Andal about like why does she do things in this way, what the reality of this actually is with her, because we're building to obviously, like, I guess Suki going against her and it being the right thing for Suki to do. But how do we get there? But yeah, what are your thoughts heading into issue 2, which looks to be quite action centric?
Yeah, I think, I don't know, understanding the reason for this mission and for them being relieving these soldiers that have coming off the battle. I mean, think, understanding the sort of real situation of the battle that they're in here is going to be very sort of eye-opening. I definitely do agree that there feels like there's something more about it, just because of how they're emphasizing at all costs. So I don't know, it feels like they might actually be sent on sort of maybe something specific later on, but maybe they'll still be at a disadvantage because they won't have all of their sort of normal gear here. Because I mean, we know they're proficient warriors even regardless of having all of the ideal gear, but they'll definitely be sort of hamstrung a bit here. So I don't know, for Bun, I don't think they're going to sort of like write his character off completely, but I could definitely see him getting, sort of majorly injured at the coming battle here, and maybe that blame being put on the Kyoshi Warriors in some form or fashion, even if it's unjust or something like that. I don't know. I definitely could see this going a lot of different ways here, and I wonder how it's going to work out considering the sort of page count that we have going forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the other thing is just sort of like almost like the significance of this story, because we know that coming out of this, when we get to like Suki's next appearance, they're not attached to the Earth Kingdom military. They're kind of more doing kind of Team Avatar stuff, traveling around, helping out where they can. So they do get themselves out of this situation. They are not attached to the military anymore. And that's going to be an interesting thing to kind of get to, because of course this is the kind of allied army in this war. Like the Earth Kingdom army is meant to be the good one, like defending everyone, holding out for the like the only nation that's like substantially still involved in the war against the Fire Nation. And we're almost more setting up the Earth Kingdom general as the villain more than anything. That's an interesting angle to take. So is it just going to be the Kyoshi Warriors realizing that, being out on the front lines of battle is not where we're at our best? And how do they get that across correctly, that like we have to help but not in this way? What are your thoughts there in terms of just like we are bridging two appearances come the end of this series? What do you think the kind of angle is going to be on that?
Yeah, no, that's something to keep in mind. I mean, I definitely feel like they're going to split with the group or with the Earth Kingdom in general, because it just doesn't feel like they would be ideal to be, sort of cogs in the machine. Like they would be, sort of like an adjacent to, Team Avatar, where they're helping out with things, even if they're not sort of as high level as, potentially ending the war, right? Like they're not, going to be doing that sort of stuff, but they still have a certain skill set that can be highly prized and highly valuable. And, we do know eventually sort of where to end up with later on, and when they do meet our group again, the main Avatar group here. So there's sort of a connecting through line where we can see where they're going to go, so we can sort of at least attempt to sort of guess based off of that where they eventually end up with. So I don't know, it'll be something to see where where that split actually lies. Although we do know that later on they're not sort of always in sort of their Kyoshi gear, right? So they do step away from that from time to time. So maybe they did sort of understand the idea of not having their gear on all the time for everything they're doing. So I don't know, it's definitely something to see how they really connect this together with everything and how well it flows.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, that's the first issue of the Kyoshi Warriors. The next issue is out next month. It's like 6 weeks between releases for this one, and then it's, I think, back down to 4. But still, we'll have the next one relatively soon in the grand scheme of comic content especially. But we'll move from there into some of our rewatches for Avatar and Korra. And we're going to start with the Korra episode for this time out, and that is K310, Long Live the Queen. So this one's interesting because it's obviously such a memorable episode. If there's anything from Book 3, which people remember and like a lot, it's this episode, because everyone talks about, like, Zahir, the Red Lotus is so cool, look, they killed the Queen, and this is the episode where that happens. But there is other stuff going on in this one with the Korra and Asami stuff on the airship, which is actually pretty fun. We go back to the desert a little bit. So it's a pretty good episode, as we're basically just about to get into the kind of finale, starting from pretty much the next episode. So definitely a good episode. But what are your overall thoughts on this one?
Yeah, no, I think it's a good episode. It definitely has its standout moments, which now we can sort of compare with Yang Chen and what she does in her novels there. So there's that we can talk about now that, we didn't have that sort of, I guess you could say, context or historical context of what Zahir does and stuff like that. But I think, even the side stuff of what Korra is doing in this episode is pretty interesting, considering, for the most part, she's sort of like out of commission here. Like, she has to figure out, her and Asami have to figure out how to sort of deal with things on their own here. So I don't know, I thought that was sort of interesting, just them sort of being in the desert and having to deal with that whole situation. And we even have the return of a fan favorite character from the original series here, which I think always gets mentioned as well.
So I guess we'll start off with the Korra and Asami plot. So we start off there, basically put on this airship. Korra is, of course, crazy chained up because she's the Avatar bender. Asami not as heavily, and she's actually able to manipulate the guard into kind of chaining her up against kind of guardrail more than anything. So that gives her the ability to kind of later on escape, which she does, and she has to get keys to get Korra out. And this all happens pretty quickly. The scenes are kind of split up across the episode, but like putting them all together. Together, they basically take over the ship quite quickly because it's only a bunch of crew members here who aren't even like skilled combatants necessarily. But Korra, in like airbending, kicking someone against the controls, breaks the ship. Basically, it goes down. And the joke here throughout all of this is basically this is a Cabbage Corp airship, but like built for the like Earth Kingdom kind of military, basically for Bossing Say, and so it's a hunk of junk compared to like a Future Industries airship or something like that. So this is why they joke about like Asami just with her own strength ripping the guardrail off the wall. She really casually just like peels the floor open, and then someone falling into the controls just like breaks everything. So it's kind of funny, that kind of Cabbage Corp quality control kind of stuff that we get early on in the episode, where it's just everything's falling apart because it's cheaper kind of machinery kind of that they have going on here. But yeah, there's some solid action here, but the idea is just like there's our opening sequence. We crash in the desert because the ship is really low quality. What are your thoughts on the opening kind of sequence of this one?
Yeah, no, I thought this was fun. I think, the idea that they're in this inferior tool from, the cabbage guy and his sort of descendants who, he's always had, issues with his, cabbage stand getting destroyed by this pesky Avatar kid, having the same sort of parallels with his sort of technology in his ship, even if it is, pretty cool that, from cabbages to owning his own sort of corporation, well, until he got sort of arrested, that is a pretty big sort of upgrade here, but, clearly, it's on the cheaper side of things, and I guess considering the queen and how, she's viewed and eventually, is sort of defeated here, I guess it's not too surprising that she would go with sort of the cheaper option compared to sort of Future Industries, right? So it kind of works in line with things here. But no, I think it's cool that they're able to sort of figure out a way out of their sort of predicament here. And, of course, Korra is sort of, as the Avatar, she's pretty much unparalleled with any sort of, average sort of bender here. And it definitely feels like they made a mistake not having any sort of like combatants left on the ship, to sort of guard over the Avatar in any sort of way here. I mean, yeah, she's pretty chained up here, but she's still the Avatar, and there probably still is something that she could have probably eventually done even as locked up as she was here. So I don't know, a bit of a mistake on their point here, but I do like how they're sort of set up is for them to sort of get out here and eventually have to figure out how to get out of the desert.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so they land in the Siwang Desert, of course. They immediately set up that there's something else out there because there are now spirits in the world. Certain spirits have taken the desert as their home. And we'll find out that this is this kind of spirit sand shark that kind of lives here, and it's a huge kind of thing. And they have to do everything that they're doing against the backdrop of this thing kind of surfing around the desert kind of pretty much after them. So they're going to have to work together to try and fix the ship. There's a bit of an argument before we eventually get around to that, because you see the crew is like, no, we're loyal to the Earth Kingdom, you're the criminals, we're doing this. But then they realize we're probably going to die if we don't all work together to make this happen. And especially once they realize how skilled of an engineer Asami is, yeah, it's really kind of important to all work together here. And these scenes all happen relatively rapid fire, that like we quickly cut to, oh, Asami has basically fixed the ship. They're working together pretty well. And right as they're about to leave on the ship, the sand shark arrives and basically bites the ship in half. And now they're basically fully stranded. But Asami comes up with the idea to use the remains to build a sand sailor, which is a cool reference that just she knows that that's what they use. And they have Korra there to kind of make this happen. So cool kind of rapid fire stuff, but it's pretty decent stuff overall. Kind of wish there was maybe a little bit more time devoted to this. Like, you, in reflection, like, you maybe could have used this episode to do a little bit more kind of personal development between Korra and Asami, than that, like, they're paired together here, but like none of their interactions maybe stand out as much as you maybe expect them to, given where we eventually end up. But what are your thoughts on some of these scenes here?
Yeah. I mean, I think it is pretty quick in terms of how they get out of things. And I think, I guess in one way, at least it highlights really well Asami's sort of prowess and sort of her engineering capabilities and just her understanding of mechanics and how to sort of put things together and to think sort of creativity, think creatively in terms of the solution towards their actual problems here versus, Korra doesn't really have any sort of, suggestions in terms of what to go here, which I guess is okay. Everyone has their different strengths here, and she's able to help actually get them out of the desert once they have this rig sort of created here. So I don't know, I like their interactions. They're there's nothing sort of like on par, and I don't know, this is where you're always sort of thinking like how far in advance are they thinking of sort of where they end up together, and would this have been a nice place to have a more sort of quiet moment between the two of them, since they are essentially stranded here with this crew here. I don't know, I think it definitely wouldn't have hurt to have it here. Maybe then it would have helped more people have less issues with it later on, but I don't think it really affects things in the grand scheme of things for it not to be anything more serious here, other than just their focus on getting out of the desert because there's something coming after them.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, Asami, as we get to the next scene, just has built a sand sailor. They kind of make their way out. They are attacked by the sand shark again. Pretty cool sequence here. Mid-air, Korra kind of like fire bends it in its mouth, and they eventually do get away. This is where one of the very small plot points, which is that Lin has been tracking Korra. She finds Naga and Pabu, calls Tonrock. They'll meet at the Misty Palms Oasis, and when Korra on the Sand Sailor gets out of the desert, they basically arrive at the Misty Palms Oasis, and so this is where we see a bunch of characters meet up. So Korra and Asami meet up with Lin, Tonrock, Naga, Pabu, and also Zuko, plus Druk. Druk is there. And we get the really fun scene. Korra and Zuko meet. Zuko highlights that he has met her before when she was younger, so you get a fun interaction there. And there Korra is informed about basically what happened in the part of the plot that we'll get to in just a minute, that the Earth Queen is dead and that the city is in chaos. And so, okay, our main character is kind of up to speed on what's happened. She will now kind of basically need to intervene as the Avatar because they're doing crazy stuff. They did it to draw her out, and yeah, that's what's going to happen kind of coming up here. So what are your thoughts on how this sequence kind of comes to an end?
I like this. I like their sort of, adventure of getting out of the desert here. I mean, it's very sort of, shark type movie or any sort of type of, animal chasing you type movie here, just with the added bender sort of, element to things. So no, I thought this was cool just to get to see them go through the desert really quickly, and just sort of see how, the sand speeder sort of works until right till the last minute where it, completely falls apart, which is so typical of things here. So, there's nice little bits there despite sort of the seriousness of the situation going on, and seeing the captain and his crew just like not even sort of really comprehending that there's a dragon there, Drux there, just sort of go out for drinks here. So I think it's a nice way to sort of get them back into the throes of things without them taking them like sort of too far from things. So no, I like that. This is like a good way to have our team separated, but not separated too much that they're so far from the plot that we're never going to see them again.
Mm-hmm. On the other side of the story, Mako and Bolin, of course, have been captured by the Red Lotus in the back of their kind of truck. The two of them talk to Gazan and Minghua, who, of course, were the ones they fought with and captured them. So they kind of pair these characters up here. They talk about what was it like being in prison for like 13 years. And, of course, Gazan especially gets across how he hated it. Very bored. They talk about what they would do to pass the time. Minghua would speculate about the guards and stuff like that. So Bolin decides to speculate about them. And so first of all, he says three things here. And then Gazan says that two out of these three things are correct. Bolin says that Gazan was raised by an older sister, that his mustache grew in at 10, and that there's an unspoken attraction between Gazan and Minghua. So I don't think we've ever had confirmation on which is which. I looked up the episode commentary, and they do comment on this, but they only comment on it to say, oh, even we don't know. we might have to ask the writer, Tim Hedrick, what he viewed as being the way this is. So it's an interesting one here. Because we don't learn a ton about Gazan or Minghua. So this is actually where we get some of that detail from. I'm assuming the raised by an older sister one is probably like correct, because there has to be, I guess, some sort of a backstory with Gazan for why he would join the Red Lotus, and him having a kind of fractured upbringing would be kind of part of that. The relationship between Gazan and Minghua, a little bit up in the air, hard to know. It's an interesting one for sure. It does serve to highlight how little we learned about some of these characters, but it's a fun scene actually seeing that Bolin just completely has a normal conversation with their kidnappers here. But what are your thoughts on this scene in the back of the van?
Yeah, and it sort of is on brand for Bolin to sort of, be able to converse with anyone in sort of like a civil way, despite sort of the seriousness of the situation going on, which of course Mako is like not having any of this. He's like, don't do this. But, Bolin just sort of speaks first and then thinks later sometimes. But no, I think it's one of those weird, nice scenes despite sort of the situation going on, because they're kidnapped and they're going to be thrown to, the Earth Queen here. So it's not really a greatest position for them to be in. But, they try to add some sort of levity to it.
Mm-hmm. Then we see the Red Lotus arrive at Ba Sing Se. They want to speak to the Queen. She eventually lets them in to have a conversation when she's informed that they have information about her missing airbenders from earlier on in the season. Zahir hands over Mako and Bolin to her for free, but he wants to trade the information on the airbenders, which he will do in exchange for the Avatar. So this is where the reveal comes out. He knows she's captured the Avatar, and that's what he wants. He does a good job of convincing her that, hey, you will avoid an international incident by doing this, because you just get the airbenders back that like only very specific people care about, whereas the Avatar actually would cause a proper incident. She agrees to this, and we kind of move on from there. We then cut to Mako and Bolin in prison, and we set up this plot point here. They can break out if Bolin can metal bend. He gets the support from all the prisoners. Everyone is supporting Bolin, but it still doesn't quite work. Throughout the whole episode, we try once or twice. Bolin doesn't seem like he can get metal bending. Now we know what this is building up towards, Bolin lava bending eventually, but it's not entirely clear that that's what's happening at this point. But it's an interesting one here where they're putting this on Bolin to potentially get them out. But what are your thoughts on these couple of scenes here?
Yeah, I mean, I think, considering he was just training, in metal bending, it's not, too out of the norm to think that maybe he might be able to get this sort of ability. I mean, we know eventually he gets something even more unique. But right now, I don't know. It almost feels like maybe metal just really wouldn't jive with his personality, with the way that he does his sort of bending. So I'm almost not sort of surprised that he can't do it, even without knowing, what eventually sort of becomes of it. But no, I think, Zahir is really good at sort of manipulating the situation towards his advantage. He definitely feels like he's able to sort of, stay calm under any sort of situation as long as it helps him achieve what his actual eventual goal is. So he definitely does have at least those part of the aspects of sort of the airbending sort of philosophy and idea, which I guess isn't too surprising considering we do know that he has sort of studied the teachings in some regard, even if he doesn't sort of adhere to them in any sort of strict fashion or anything like that. But no, it's definitely a good setup in terms of manipulating the queen to get sort of what he wants.
Yeah, it's an interesting scene because, deep down he hates world leaders, and especially her. he knows basically everyone hates her, so he must as well. But he actually handles her very delicately here, which is quite interesting. But we'll see, of course, later on when his patience kind of runs out. Zahir then goes to spy on the queen because nothing's happened for a while. This is where he finds out that the Avatar has escaped. This is where also he tells the rest of the group, we're going to make the Avatar come to us. It's clear that she could be anywhere right now. We just have to force a situation where she has to come after us. They go in to confront the queen. She has the Dai Li defend her, but the Red Lotus immediately just win because they've got a combustion bender in there. Ghazan is quite skilled, even though I don't think he actually uses lava bending here. And then Minghua just smashes a bunch of people against the wall with ice. It's a very, very easy win, and it's an interesting one because the Dai Li are always presented as being a bit of a elite group of kind of unnamed characters, so this is such a easy victory for them. It makes complete sense. And then we get the big moment. Zahir says that he doesn't believe in queens when she says you wouldn't hurt a queen, and he begins to airbend a sphere around her head and then sucks the air out of her lungs. He holds on to this until she dies, and we see her kind of collapse to the ground as he gives his big speech about basically the importance of air, kind of freedom and stuff like that. And yes, Earth Queen Hu Ting is killed by Zahir in this moment. And it's the idea that the Red Lotus earlier on didn't say exactly what they were going to do, but you realize here they're going to cause pure chaos in Ba Sing Se. That effectively the biggest city in the world, second biggest city in the world, whatever way you consider Republic City, the Avatar is going to have to come here to try and do something with what's happening here, and that's what he's doing. But what are your thoughts on this action couple of scenes that we get here with Zahir and the Red Lotus?
Yeah, I think this is definitely one of those moments where everyone sort of mentions the Red Lotus and their abilities and their skills and, how, I guess you could say, cool that they can potentially be. Because, they definitely do take, on the Dai Li without much effort here. And I don't know, I wonder if this is a case of them just being, so much better than the Dai Li that they're able to overcome them without any effort, or has the Dai Li just sort of declined over time, sort of like how we sometimes consider the White Lotus in this era, these are just sort of the regular White Lotus, regular Dai Li that are good, they're above average, but they're not amazingly better than someone who's a official sort of master in the element, or benders who have their own unique abilities and skills. So there's something to consider there, considering how well they're able to sort of take over here. But yes, Zahir is sort of running out of patience finally and taking down the Earth Queen. with this sort of ability that, up until this point, I'm sure people have speculated about this, tons of times from the original series, but we hadn't really seen it, done in this sort of form or fashion, and done sort of directly here, especially as someone who's so high profile. So we get to really see sort of the aims of the Red Lotus and what they're willing to do in order to achieve what they want or what they see as the best result for the world. That's what they're sort of all about here. So it's definitely something a note, and then we get to see how this plays out.
Mm-hmm. It's an interesting scene because, yes, it's this inherently violent airbending technique that pretty much only exists to either knock people out, but even then it's a very dangerous way to just knock someone out, or just directly kill them, and that doesn't align with most air nomads that we've met, and that's the way it's been presented when Yang Chen does kind of moves that are similar to this. And then the one example prior to this, of course, Afiko from the old trading card game, who could also suck air out of people's lungs, was a villainous airbender character. So they've always presented this theoretical kind of thing as being like, yeah, you don't do this, and there's a reason like the air nomads are the way they are, is because this is the thing they're kind of capable of doing. You also see this, I suppose, with Amihan in the Roku novels, the idea of like an aggressive airbender focusing on like the cutting aspect of kind of like wind. So it's just the things we never see like Aang do typically. It's really interesting to see here. But Earth Queen Hu Ting has been killed. He then goes to put out a message across Ba Sing Se, so that the news actually spreads. He announces that he has killed the queen. We do have to note that they never say like die, killed. It's like take down or like fell in violent circumstances. There's a few different wordings to it, but like you get what they mean, but they obviously for whatever reason can't just directly say die, even though I'm pretty sure there is dialogue elsewhere in, I think, both shows where they do just say the word die. So there's some weirdness about when they can and can't do that. But the people will not be oppressed by tyrants anymore. He's putting Ba Sing Se back in the hands of the people. And as he's saying this, we see Gazan using lava bending to tear down the walls of Ba Sing Se. The separation between the rings is kind of like gone. And Ba Sing Se is now in complete chaos because of what the Red Lotus have done. They've just killed the queen, put everyone together, and they're just going to leave it like that. And that's their kind of idea of just freedom, complete chaos, and this is what's going to draw Korra out, basically. What are your thoughts on this message here to draw Korra out?
Yeah, I mean, I think message eventually gets very well sort of received here, because if their aims are to create chaos and have less division within the city here, they definitely sort of have achieved this. And it's something to get to see sort of Kazan sort of single-handedly break down the inner wall of the city here that's separating the sort of divisions here. And of course, all the people that are quite sort of upset with the status quo run into sort of the upper ring here. So I don't know, it's definitely, I think he gets his point across, and they're sort of laying the foundation for what could potentially be, in their view, sort of a better world here. And we'll have to see how it actually plays out.
Mm-hmm. We see the other prisoners are freed, but Mako and Bolin's cell remains locked. Zahir comes over to them. There's a very brief kind of exchange, but Zahir has control. He says he will set them free, but they have to deliver a message to Korra from him. And so that kind of happens. We cut away from that. And that is the kind of like end of this sequence basically here. The message that kind of goes out, I think, that informs the prisoners of everything that happened, does say that, like, I think, like, Ba Sing Se is being looted quite heavily all over the place. So they do immediately begin to present the very, like, negative aspects of this, that, like, the queen being kind of killed, some sort of a change happening, Ba Sing Se is kind of good, but there's not really the particular, maybe, great good intent from the Red Lotus here, because it is just going to cause a lot of people to be in danger. as we will immediately, I think, go into in like the next few episodes, that like normal families, like say Mako and Bolin's family, they're just in a really bad situation because of everything that's happened here. And it's an interesting kind of approach to it, the idea of like, yeah, chaos, freedom. It's because again, yeah, they are like Vatu kind of followers basically, and that's the whole Red Lotus idea of like just excessive focus on kind of chaos and viewing that as being like complete freedom. It's an interesting angle here because we know that Ba Sing Se has problems. It's been presented in this season directly, nearly every other appearance of it as well. But this is probably not the way to kind of fix the problem necessarily. But what are your thoughts on kind of what happens here at the end?
Yeah. I mean, the idea that there's, issues with Ba Sing Se, considering that the whole reason why, Zahir was sort of, setting up this situation to originally get Korra was because they took away the airbenders that were being, potentially unlawfully conscripted into the Earth Queen's sort of army here. So there's plenty of things where there's issues, and, this has been going on for many years. But the idea that, the initial sort of, oh, this is a better thing, like you're saying there, definitely sort of gets pretty quickly realized that there's a lot more things going on that are causing issues here. There needs to be some sort of structure, which, Zahir and the Red Lotus, their whole thing is that there shouldn't be any structure. Things should just sort of play out as they will. But, the initial transition for that is a very sort of rough time for people to go through, especially ones who don't want to be in the mix of things here. So definitely feels like there's, conflict there, that there needs to be something else sort of in place here. But no, that's not really what the Red Lotus is about. They're just going to do their thing and let everything come to pass here. And, here is sort of just going to sort of get his way in the end regardless of things, which is why he's talking with Mako and Bolin just to sort of get the message across. And he does pretty quickly sort of put them in the place there, which, I mean, they're in a confined space and he has airbending which goes straight through the bars, so there's only so much they can really do in this situation.
And then this obviously links into the actual, I think, last scene of the episode where Korra finds out the Earth Queen is dead, the city is in chaos, and that everything's happening in that regard. She knows like they're after her specifically. I think that there is a point, I think it's earlier on in the episode, Mako does ask like, you guys had a chance to basically kill Korra, like why didn't you? So like they're prompting that idea of you guys don't just want to kill Korra, there's more to it there. You want to capture her. So they're setting up that teaser of the idea that like, oh, what's that about? And eventually, of course, it will get revealed that they actually just want to get rid of the Avatar full stop. So they have to capture her, Avatar state, and end the cycle that way. Is a interesting little bit of setup that we get here. But good stuff here. This is the episode right before, effectively the last 3 episodes of the season are basically the finale of book 3. So that'll be fun to get to next time. But we'll immediately go into our last review for the episode, and that is for Avatar. It's 304, Sokka's Master. So interesting one here. Sokka gets his kind of early book 3 focus episode. It's the space sword, meteorite sword episode. It's Pian Dao's episode. This is a fun one here to just have Sokka get this, focus, get some extra skill because there's so much battle stuff that's going to come up. We need Sokka to be able to do a little bit more in battle as well, and giving him a kind of skill like being a good swordsman is a really kind of cool thing to do. And then of course, we add another old master to our kind of roster with the Order of the White Lotus reveal at the end. I often forget as well which Fire Nation, what part of the like Fire Nation plot is happening during which episode, but this is of course we cut to just Iroh working out in secret like 5 or 6 times in the episode just to reveal that he's now in like amazing condition and is preparing for something. It's an interesting setup on that side of things. But what are your thoughts on Sokka's Master?
This has always been a favorite episode. I mean, I think many people have this as a favorite episode. I mean, it's one of those ones where, it's it's not like a crazy episode or anything like that, but I think, with Sokka being a favorite character of many people and him sort of, wanting him to be good, and we get to see his skills and his creativity and sort of his different way of thinking in the episode and how that plays so well into his character. I think they did a really good job of writing sort of a situation where it looks like he could potentially be messing up, but he actually sort of exceeds in all the ways that only he could as a character, as well as we get to see him sort of grow in sort of his swordsmanship and his sort of abilities at a pretty sort of rapid rate, maybe too quick, but he did have a baseline sort of like abilities already, so it's not like too crazy to see that he can become sort of pretty good by the end of things, even if he isn't sort of like a super master swordsman. So no, I thought this was a very fun episode. It's always a favorite of mine.
I suppose we'll start with the Iroh stuff. When I was doing my kind of recap here, it was just interesting, just like, oh yeah, is this the only cutaway from the Sokka action that we get here? Is just like Iroh on the floor eating, kind of making the guard come across like he's not up to much, doing the exercises in secret, and then, oh yeah, this is the one where we just reveal he's in amazing shape and he's got all these muscles at the end of the episode. Yeah, that is the only side plot that we do here. Nothing really with Zuko here. I almost forgot that they devoted like a whole kind of side plot to this, but what are your thoughts on this, giving a kind of, it's not that much time in the episode to it, but just a bunch of scenes to Iroh exercising?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is what probably people always sort of remember of the character, although I feel like when you think about it, sort of like going back, you don't necessarily consider it in this episode, because I think the reveal of how he sort of gets out there and how sort of impactful that is, you sort of like link that to that episode rather than this one. But it's this episode is where he's doing all sort of the self-training and sort of getting all the rude comments from the sort of jailer here, despite him sort of being exactly sort of 180 and him just sort of being very sort of coy and sneaky in terms of what he's actually doing here, which I think is really cool. I mean, I think that seems sort of like on par for Iroh's sort of character here, where like he he understands how people's perceptions of him can be viewed, and he's able to sort of manipulate them towards his sort of advantage here. So no, I like the sort of quite sort of subplot, sort of the only sort of cutaway to the other side of what people are doing, because we cut away to sort of what the gang is doing without Sokka here, but this is the only sort of cutaway to what other characters that have nothing to do with our main group are actually doing.
Yeah, the Iroh stuff is interesting because I suppose the idea is like you're kind of thinking to it like, okay, he knows, I guess, some big stuff is about to go down. It ultimately, I guess, mostly comes into play for the eclipse, where the idea is that he just, with pure strength, just like breaks out of his cell. And that's why he kind of primarily needs the muscles, and then I guess just to be in best fighting condition to stop. But like it's an interesting one, just how much setup they do just for that kind of mid-season finale kind of moment of like the guard who kind of insulted him this whole episode gets to be like, oh, he was a one-man army just with his pure strength breaking out. But yeah. Well, we get to the main plot of the episode, and that is Sokka. So the setup scene for the dynamic here is that the gang are watching a meteor shower happen, and then one of those meteors actually crashes nearby next to a village and causes a fire on the grass. The team have to come together to stop this from causing a massive fire, potentially destroying the village. And the idea here is that Sokka just ends up in a situation where there's nothing really obvious that he can do to help in this crazy situation. All the benders, of course, get to use their skills to immediately stop everything, and he just feels very useful in this situation. And this makes him reflect on his role within the group, that this situation has maybe happened a couple other times, and he's not focusing on the positives that he brings to the group. This has been an eye-opening kind of encounter for him, and this is the entire setup for the character work that they do in this episode. And he talks to the gang the next morning about this. They're so amazing. He feels like he can't do anything of course, the group doesn't actually feel that way about him. They make a maybe slight kind of half joke about how, like, they don't immediately maybe point out, like, all of his best skills, mostly focusing on, like, he reads maps and, like, his humor. But Katara does get across that, like, we really don't feel that way about you. I'm sorry you feel that way now, but, like, we do value you as a member of the group. So they go to bring him shopping, and we'll get to that in just a second. But what are your thoughts on the character setup for this episode?
Yeah, I like this. I mean, I think, seeing how they're able to sort of combat the fire from the meteor shower, it does really show, benders of the group, sort of their abilities and their strengths and how they're able to sort of coordinate really well in this sort of situation, which is very huge. Like, for anyone who, for any sort of group of sort of non-benders, this would have been like a massive event that would have taken, like a whole village in order to combat, right? But, we have these three very talented, strong sort of bender kids able to sort of deal with the situation here. And I think, it's one of those situations where it's just like, it's a bad way to sort of compare yourself to in this situation. But unfortunately, that's what Sokka has to do. That's what he's left with doing the situation. And of course, even Momo gets in on it and is able to put out fires a bit quicker than he is. So, it's just an unfortunate situation of where Sokka is at this time. But I think, like you said, Katara does come across pretty clear that they don't really think of him in that sort of way. And eventually later on, even though the jokes they make about the maps and the jokes early on, they see how valuable that really is later on. So I think, there is something there that even he himself doesn't realize, or even the group itself doesn't realize is really important, which just takes a little bit of a separation to actually learn that.
Mm-hmm. So they go to the weapons store. He's looking for a new weapon. We get some fun kind of stuff here as, like, various characters are trying out different things. Aang with the armor tips over. Sokka's using, like, nunchucks and stuff like that. But of course he eventually is drawn towards a sword. The reveal here is that it's a Piandao sword and he actually lives nearby. So Aang actually is the one to propose the solution here, which is that, okay, maybe a new weapon, but what you really need is a master, someone to train you in a skill, so that you have something that's, somewhat equivalent to us with our bendings. And they do talk about that they all had masters, of course, and Katara talks about Paku. I guess with Toph they're mostly alluding to badger moles, and then with Aang they're talking about Katara, Toph, and Gyatso. So it's just a kind of fun idea of, like, oh, we'll go to see the swordsmith, the sword master, and we'll see how it goes with if Sokka can convince him to actually do training. And he seems very interested in the sword. But yeah, what are your thoughts on this part of the setup here, bringing Piandao into play?
Yeah, no, I think it's a good way to get, Sokka an extra skill and ability that is unique to him and what he can do, that can sort of benefit the group here. I think, all of them definitely do have that sort of, they started from, rather low or, low in their skill set to becoming sort of the amazing, almost prodigy sort of like, skill set that they have, at this current time here. So no, I think this was good. I think even the setup just for them getting into the shopping here, I think is fun, because we've seen before that Sokka's in the shopping or just getting things in general. He's all about sort of the accessories and stuff like that. So I think, it's a nice way to sort of get him, even in the beginning, to sort of start thinking more sort of positively about the situation here, and him sort of checking out all the different weapons here and which ones don't work and are too heavy for him to lift, like the mallet here, and seeing Aang interact with it in the armor, and him talking about like the wind sword, which is interesting considering we're just talking about sort of maybe more potentially deadly effects of airbending and stuff like that. So I wonder how much he would actually use that sort of, technique or anything like that. But him being an airbending master, of course, he knows about those techniques. He just wouldn't use it because that's just not what he would do. But no, I think this was a great way to get Sokka moving in the right direction in terms of actually learning something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we go to where Piandao lives. His butler, Fat, basically reveals that, look, nearly everyone is turned away by the master. I don't have much hope in you. In front of Piandao, there's immediately the Piandao is a bit of a reaction to Sokka just saying his name is Sokka. And Piandao fully expects Sokka to do the usual thing about like, oh, I've traveled around the world, I've done all this amazing stuff. But actually, Sokka's just like, quite humble about the whole thing and actually quite down on himself. And he highlights how unworthy he is. And this actually is the thing that makes Piandao want to train him. Now, it is interesting. I think you have to bring in kind of reveals from the end of the episode here where he immediately knows Sokka's from the Water Tribe. He immediately knows, I guess, this is the Avatar, basically, as well, like this group. So he just is like, oh, well, yeah, this is in line with, the Order of the White Lotus, I guess. This is perfectly fine. And he does honestly just think that I suppose Sokka has the right approach of someone that he does want to train. So that's why he kind of goes ahead with it, because you also have to remember that like a lot of the things that Sokka gets, I suppose, praise for here, being kind of like unique, versatile, and like stuff like that, I guess Piandao would have those traits himself. So being like unorthodox with who he chooses as a pupil is also like part of this. But what are your thoughts on this scene with the end reveals of the episode in mind?
Yeah, no, I think this is very sort of like on brand for a master, swordsman, swordsmith, to sort of pick someone based off of their sort of unique sort of abilities and qualities and sort of ideas, and sort of maybe not being such a bragger about what they're doing, because it seems like you've already experienced that before, right? Like that was his sort of initial sort of assumption of someone who's just randomly going to come to my door and ask for training, and that sort of stands out. I think that definitely is something that you can see is something that would, I don't know, appeal to someone who's been presumably training people for so long, and especially with understanding that he's part of the White Lotus. I think those would be sort of the understandings and sort of the tenets that they would sort of strive to sort of have in their people and stuff like that, at least at sort of like a base level here. So no, I think this is all makes sense in terms of even if Sokka was part of the Fire Nation, if he had these same sort of qualities, this would be someone who Piandao would want to train potentially.
Mm-hmm. And then there's also I suppose Piandao's backstory that we have from, I think, originally the old Nickelodeon website, but it's been kind of re-echoed in the RPG with him, and the idea that he is the son of two like notable firebenders, and so part of his arc as like a non-bender who was expected to be a firebender is that like he, I guess, feels unworthy, and this is how he eventually became so good with the sword as a non-bender fighter. That's another reason why, like, I suppose he maybe latches onto the Sokka unworthy angle. But yeah, we start the training here, and there's some interesting stuff here. The weapon is an extension of yourself. It's a versatile weapon. There are unlimited possibilities when you kind of master the sword. We also do cut away at this point to the group without Sokka, and they're a little bit clueless without his schedule, for one. They're just going to sit around doing nothing. Like, they just don't know what to do when he's not here to organize them. And without the jokes, it feels like everyone's a little bit awkward, which is just fun to just really highlight that, like, the group isn't fully gelling together perfectly. It's not that they don't get on or anything like that. It's just, Sokka's a bit missed in the group dynamic here, and it's just quite fun in the way it happens. But yeah, as we go through this, it's just these various kind of lessons, like most of them not directly related to kind of combat or using a sword, and Sokka doing things in a really odd way. Calligraphy lesson, show uniqueness, so he stamps his face onto the paper. We constantly cut back to the sparring against Fat, and he continuously gets better and better. But the idea is that like the skill aspect of this is not really the like absolute focus. Like the takeaway from this is that like he gets a day, because the timing of this episode is kind of weird, because they do highlight that this whole lesson montage is one day, and then he spends like the next day just forging the sword. So it's like 1 day of sword training is like the takeaway here. But yeah, paint what he sees just from a memory, and he paints this very positive, vague landscape. Rock gardening, so he creates a relaxation spot for himself, even though he wrecks the garden. But Piandao praises him for it because he did it all in his own unique way, and so he is going to get a sword. It's very fast paced, kind of going kind of back through this episode, but you get the point they're making with all these kind of lessons, and they'll come back in the big fight at the end. But what are your thoughts on the day training that he gets here?
Yeah, I mean, it is very quick, and you would think that wouldn't really be that much, but it's really a mindset that he's training him, not actually in swordcraft. Like when we learn later on that he did train sort of Zuko, you could see that sort of being sort of like a more sort of like direct sort of instruction in terms of like what to actually do, how to use the sword, and that sort of thing. And there is some of that here. We do get the cutaways, like you're saying, to see him actually sort of training with the butler. And we do get to see him improve over time, but it is very quickly, and it is just one day of training, right? So there's really not that much here, but it's enough to sort of get Sokka thinking of the possibilities and sort of use his already pretty good skills in fighting in battle, in order to sort of hone them into something sort of specific that he can actually use in the battles to come.
So Sokka decides, Piandao kind of brings him in and says like, hey, choose what like material you want to make your sword out of. Like, it's really important. And Sokka's like, I don't really know about all these differences between steels. So he decides, I'll do the meteorite. That kind of works, I guess. And Piandao's just like, well, okay, I guess they understand this inherently will work. But yeah, this is where he comes back to the group to get them to help him kind of bring the meteorite up to where Piandao is. They're so happy to have him back, and they laugh at him not even trying to make jokes. It's very, very funny, including a little bit of a kind of like tease of the crush that Toph has on Sokka as well. But yeah, we then go through this sort of like montage of like the actual forging of the sword, the work that goes into kind of chipping the meteorite apart and stuff like that. But yeah, eventually the sword is made, and then we get to the presentation here. So yeah, Piandao praises Sokka for all his creativity, his intelligence, not quite the skill, but he is a worthy swordsman. This is where Sokka admits that he has lied about who he is. He's not from the Fire Nation, he's Water Tribe. And this prompts immediately a battle. So he's been given his sword. Immediately he has to fight Piandao. And we'll get to that in just a second. But what are your thoughts on the forging of the meteorite sword sequence?
Yeah, no, I think this was very fun. I think it's very sort of like, again, it just makes sense and on brand that Sokka would sort of want to sort of step out and sort of, build a sword that's sort of unique to him and has unique sort of properties here. So I like the idea that, Piandao here was like, yes, we will make, the most sort of unique sword that has ever been made before, because you're using sort of a meteorite in order to sort of forge your weapon here. And I think, that really sort of sets the stage for, Sokka sort of going forward. It's unfortunate that the sword doesn't really come back in the future, but I think, the initial idea of the forging of it, him sort of staying overnight, seeing his sort of like determination to forge it, and sort of Piandao sort of noticing this as well. Even the rest of the group, we get to see them sort of stick their heads out while he's doing the work on the forge. So no, I like that this is really something that is going to be sort of an extension of his arm, because he put so much effort into making it and using such a unique sort of rock with it. I wonder what he does with the rest of the meteorite, because it seemed like there was a lot left over. But yeah, it's definitely a great sort of setup here for the final confrontation here, when Sokka sort of again doesn't feel quite sort of accepting of all the praise that he's received, because he has sort of deceived his new master in sort of this training that he got, and the sword as well.
So then during the fight, initially you maybe get the sense like, oh, is Piandao actually really annoyed about this? But immediately he starts like narrating the fight, praising Sokka's actions in this fight, like using the environment, using his better kind of agility because he's younger than Piandao. All of this stuff to stay in the fight, because they highlight that, yes, there is a giant skill difference between these two, but Sokka can make up for that a little bit with all of these kind of unique kind of tactics and skills that he does have. Piandao seems to have the approach that just raw technique with the sword is something that just will come with time, and it's actually good that he has the foundation in the other stuff first. And yeah, eventually over the course of this fight, like they travel over like all over the kind of environment. Sokka is eventually bested by Piandao, which causes Team Avatar to join in. This is where he reveals that, like, okay, like I'm too old to fight the Avatar. I knew it was like you the whole time. I knew you were a Water Tribe the whole time. They ask, why would you do this then? You're Fire Nation. The Way of the Sword doesn't belong to any one nation. Very Order of the White Lotus. Even though he doesn't quite fully reveal that to them, which is kind of funny. He keeps it a secret, only secretly giving them the kind of Paisho tile at the end. But he does say to Sokka before he kind of sends him off, like, I believe that one day you will become a better master than I am. And so that's kind of how we kind of wrap it up. Sokka gets his sword, gets a foundation in how to use the sword, and this is going to be quite useful kind of going forward. Only other detail here is that Sokka gives a little bit of a chunk of the meteorite material to Toph, where she reveals that you can actually really easily metal bend it. Though I suppose that this property is more later clarified in the comics, that like this is particularly pliable to metal benders. It's like a beginner material, actually. It's quite good for that. But you see that, yeah, she can manipulate this pretty well. And she will use this as her kind of like a little kind of like arm kind of bracelet that she has. So that's a cool little kind of moment there at the end. But yeah, what are your thoughts on the final sequence of this episode?
Yeah, I like the sort of, idea that he knew all along what was going on, and he was just willing to sort of teach Sokka because of, his philosophy on the way of the sword here. Just, this idea that any nation can sort of have this sort of skill, this sort of technique, and that sort of, like you said, with him being part of the White Lotus, even though he doesn't tell them, which, it makes sense that he wouldn't tell them. Like, they're not, we know that there's more to the White Lotus than, sort of joining. There's a whole process and initiation and stuff like that. And depending on your point of view, maybe you don't really want to be part of the White Lotus. So, I think it's cool that he's, just sort of giving them sort of the hint of something grandeur or something sort of more out there that maybe potentially can sort of help them. But no, I think Sokka does a really good job in sort of, combating in this situation and just using his unique abilities, and how that really is something that's valued by Piandao, which I think comes across pretty well. And I think, by end of this, Sokka is more confident in himself, even if it is just sort of like, 2 days of training, right? Like, it's not really super crazy. He didn't learn any crazy sort of sword techniques or anything like that, but he learned enough that he can become a master in the future. And I feel like a lot of masters, even with, Paku and stuff like that with Katara, like, once you learn the basis, you have to continue training on your own to become sort of like a true master.
Yeah, like I think that's the thing that some people kind of get it into their heads, is that like we don't see enough training. And Avatar very much does take the approach that, like, especially with like avatars, that like, look, there'll always be a little bit of a like roadblock of like the initial philosophy for each new element, but like once you get that, they already know their home element. Like the rest just comes in time. Like there's never going to be like the need to like extensively show like technique being like beat into the characters necessarily. But yeah, the interesting thing with this episode, of course, is that the space sword is such a memorable weapon that, of course, he loses in the finale. And he's depicted having it later on in life in like the Old Friends poster. Like it's a somewhat unique depiction of the characters at a specific age. But we've never actually covered any story of him getting a sword. Like, I'm pretty sure in all the comics, he doesn't have like any sort of a replacement sword. And I'm pretty sure it's the same in the movie. So there's a weirdness here when it's like, what's the deal there? Because they're kind of like undercutting this episode like a little bit, that like he has a sword should be his weapon, right? I get the club he has is kind of like, it's more a kind of sword-esque item rather than like a kind of flail or whatever. But it's the idea that I think everyone wants Sokka to have a sword because of this episode. And it's weird that they've avoided doing anything with it. And you kind of alluded to the idea that Piano probably has a lot of meteorite material left. So like there probably is the ability to make another one. And then unless some metal bender randomly destroyed it properly, the one he lost should be out there somewhere. So it feels like there's a story somewhere that like we kind of need to get, because I think it always comes up with Sokka in terms of like, oh, what story would you like for Sokka covering like the gap period? And it's like, well, this one makes a lot of sense. And it's like Sokka, one of the main like historical fights we know he's involved in is defending Korra against the Red Lotus, and it feels like surely he had a sword during that one to be as much of a threat as he was. That's the sort of question. But what are your thoughts on that? I suppose the legacy of this episode when it comes to him not actually having a sword post-series.
Yeah. No, that always comes up in every sort of conversation with him. And I think, it seems like it's something that he would have. I mean, I think, him becoming a master swordsman. I mean, it even mentioned, with Zuko later on, that's how we know that he was trained by Piandao as well. So like, the idea of him and swords, I don't know, it definitely sort of makes sense. I mean, I guess, him having this sort of, other weapon from his sort of native homeland, I mean, that makes sense as well. But no, we've seen him depicted with one, which again, that is sort of like a flyer, which, at that point in time, were they really considering the future of the series as much as they have now? I don't know, maybe not. But it's there as a depiction, and it's something that we do know that he at least was proficient in actually using. So it definitely is. It feels like it would be an easy story to tell that wouldn't sort of like interfere with too much later on, other than the fact that he has to have a sword in any sort of future battles post whenever he gets it. So I don't know, it's definitely something I would be enjoy to actually get to see in some form of media.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just it highlights, I suppose, like you probably want to see Sokka interact kind of with Piandao a little bit more, and maybe assess where his technique is at this kind of when he's older, that sort of thing. Does he get any further instruction at all? But yeah, it's overall an interesting episode. Again, we're kind of thinking about like Netflix Avatar coming up. You sort of wonder, is an episode like this, are they going to have the time to give this anything resembling this amount of time? We just recently got the episode titles for season 3, and it looks like they're getting to the invasion like immediately. So like, unless this is like montage in episode 1, you kind of wonder where's the time for something like this, as cool as it is. But yeah, that's the benefit the series has with the 20 episodes, is that you can have these kind of more one-off episodes. Something like this is the sort of episode that it feels like Korra kind of often needed to kind of get itself kind of into a kind of even better position. But it's still interesting. But the aim is to hopefully try to finish these rewatches before the movie officially releases. We should, I think, be able to get it done, because you can see we're nearly at the end of book 3. We're getting towards the middle of book 3 of Avatar as well. We'll get it happen, get it done, and then we'll get into the newer content as well. But otherwise, yes, that has been the episode. It's been episode 304 of the Avatar Online podcast. It's been myself and Greg. Thanks for listening, and bye.